What if the greatest conflict in human history still holds secrets, buried not in the past, but in silence? World War II reshaped the world in fire and blood. It gave rise to legends, heroes, monsters, and enigmas that remain unsolved to this day. Somewhere between the ruins of bombed-out cities and the shadows of classified archives lie stories that don't quite add up. Disappearances without a trace, codes that were never cracked, missions that were never recorded, and whispers of secret weapons, vanishing soldiers, and inexplicable events that even veterans refused to speak of. What really happened in the dark skies above the Pacific when entire squadrons vanished mid-flight? Why did the Nazis pour resources into bizarre occult experiments? And what was the true purpose of that forgotten bunker deep beneath Berlin, sealed off since 1945? These are not tales of fiction. These are fragments of real history, with pieces still missing. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the mysteries of World War II, ones they never taught you in school, and that history still struggles to explain. Antarctica, vast, silent, and impenetrably cold. A continent of extremes, where winds howl like ancient spirits and temperatures plunge to levels inhospitable to nearly all life. Ice stretches as far as the eye can see, forming jagged mountains and hidden valleys beneath a surface that has remained largely untouched for millennia. It is a land that guards its secrets well. And for decades, one particular secret has lingered at the edge of historical curiosity and speculative obsession. Did the Nazis establish a secret base in Antarctica? The origins of this mystery begin with something verifiably real: the German Antarctic expedition of 1938 to 1939. Under orders from the Nazi High Command, a specially outfitted vessel, the Schwabenland, set sail from Hamburg, bound for the frozen south. The ship was equipped with aircraft capable of launching from its deck, Dornier flying boats that would sweep across the icy expanse, mapping and photographing thousands of square miles of the Queen Maud Land region. The Germans named this territory Neuschwabenland, New Swabia. Officially, the mission had clear objectives. Germany, like many nations at the time, was seeking new whaling grounds to reduce its dependence on imported fats and oils. The expedition claimed a swath of land and planted flags, asserting Germany's presence in this distant frontier. At face value, it was a bold, though not entirely unusual, exercise in geopolitical positioning. But what if that wasn't the entire story? In the years that followed World War II, scattered reports, declassified documents, and whispered accounts began to suggest something more enigmatic. Rumors surfaced of covert construction projects, secret laboratories, and underground bunkers buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice. Some claimed that fleeing Nazis, including high-ranking officials, had escaped justice by retreating to this icy fortress. Others went further still, suggesting the development of exotic technologies, some even hinting at propulsion systems that defied conventional physics. How much of this is rooted in fact? And where does the line between reality and post-war mythology begin to blur? We know that the Third Reich had a deep fascination with the esoteric. Himmler's SS conducted expeditions to Tibet, sought ancient relics like the Spear of Destiny, and was enthralled by myths of lost civilizations and occult power. This ideological mix of science and mysticism has fueled many of the more speculative narratives surrounding New Schwabenland. But could such interests have extended to Antarctica? In 1946, just a year after the war's end, the United States launched Operation High Jump, a massive naval expedition to Antarctica led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Comprising over 4,000 personnel, an aircraft carrier, destroyers, and a full suite of aircraft, the operation's stated goal was to establish the Antarctic research base Little America 4 and to conduct scientific research. Yet the scale of the operation was unusual, especially for a peacetime mission. Adding to the intrigue, the mission was abruptly cut short after only a few weeks. Byrd himself, in interviews following the expedition, made cryptic remarks about the possibility of aircraft capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds. His comments have since been interpreted in numerous ways, ranging from Cold War concerns to something far less conventional. Was Operation High Jump merely a research expedition? Or was it a reconnaissance mission responding to rumors of a Nazi stronghold hidden beneath the ice? Skeptics point to the lack of any hard evidence. No confirmed sightings, no recovered documents, no physical remnants of a base. They argue that the Antarctic environment is too harsh, too unforgiving for any sustained covert operations, let alone the construction of vast underground facilities. And yet, others counter that such a location would be ideal precisely because of its remoteness and inaccessibility. Some theories delve deeper into the fringe. These propose that the Nazis discovered something in Antarctica, something ancient. Lost cities beneath the ice, non-human technology buried for thousands of years. According to these accounts, Neuschwabenland wasn't just a hiding place. It was a gateway to something older, something hidden. They point to the Piri Reis map, a 16th century world map that appears to depict the Antarctic coast centuries before its official discovery, as a clue that perhaps Antarctica has long concealed more than we understand. More grounded, but still speculative, theories suggest that any Nazi presence in Antarctica may have served as a staging ground for submarine activity. U-boat sightings after the war, and strange anomalies recorded by Allied ships, have sometimes been linked to possible post-war German outposts. A number of U-boats went missing at the war's end, never accounted for. Could they have headed south? And then there are the enduring mysteries surrounding Base 211, an alleged secret installation in Queen Maud Land. Though there is no definitive evidence of its existence, the idea persists in conspiracy literature, bolstered by fragments of wartime intelligence and the occasional mention in obscure post-war documents. Some believe that Base 211 was the final redoubt, a hidden fortress from which remnants of the Nazi regime hoped to regroup, perhaps even plan a return. Despite decades of speculation, no definitive proof has emerged to confirm these extraordinary claims. Modern satellite imagery has revealed no anomalous structures, and scientific expeditions have not uncovered evidence of any hidden installations. And yet, the mystery persists. Why? Perhaps it's the sheer isolation of Antarctica, a place where human presence is minimal and much of the terrain remains unexplored beneath miles of ice. Or perhaps it's the enduring appeal of an unsolved question: what if? What if the Nazis did establish something more in Antarctica than just a territorial claim? What if, amid the white silence, something lies forgotten, waiting, something not accounted for in the clean lines of official history? Whatever the truth may be, the idea of a Nazi base in Antarctica continues to blur the line between historical curiosity and modern myth. And in that cold, remote world of ice and shadow, some mysteries still remain untouched, unproven, and unresolved. Could we ever know for certain what secrets lie beneath the ice? Or has Antarctica already buried them for good? The frost clings to the rusted steel. The air is still, quiet, too quiet for a place once filled with screams no one was meant to hear. Outside, the icy wind whistles across the plains of northeastern China, sweeping past what remains of a complex once hidden in plain sight. A facility nestled in the outskirts of Harbin, in the puppet state of Manchukuo. A place once known only by a code name, Unit 731. Here, in the chill of Manchurian winter, under the camouflage of wartime necessity, the Empire of Japan conducted some of the most disturbing and closely guarded experiments of the Second World War. What began as a covert research center for epidemic prevention grew into something far darker, something many historians now compare to the horrors of the Nazi camps, though for decades it received far less public attention. Officially, Unit 731 was part of the Kwantung Army's Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. Unofficially, it was a center for human experimentation, biological weapons development, and ruthless scientific pursuit carried out without limits or mercy. What happened here was not simply a military operation, it was a descent into scientific madness. The facts, as chilling as they are well documented. Unit 731 was commanded by General Shiro Ishii, a medical doctor turned military researcher who believed that Japan's future dominance depended not only on military might, but on mastery over disease and death itself. Under his leadership, the facility swelled to house thousands of personnel, doctors, biologists, engineers, all working under a strict veil of secrecy. Victims, euphemistically referred to as maruta or logs, were brought in from across the occupied territories, Chinese civilians, Korean prisoners, and later even Russian and Allied POWs. They were subjected to gruesome procedures in the name of science, vivisections without anesthesia, exposure to extreme temperatures to study frostbite, deliberate infection with plague, cholera, and syphilis. These were not acts of spontaneous cruelty. They were carefully planned experiments designed to produce data. But what remains less clear is why such vast resources and secrecy were devoted to these operations, and what else may have been uncovered behind those sealed walls. Some records suggest that Unit 731 was not merely a biological weapons laboratory, but part of a broader effort to understand the limits of human endurance, perhaps even to explore ways of manipulating the human body for more than just destruction. Survivors from nearby villages recalled rumors of immortal soldiers, test subjects who were pumped full of strange compounds, subjected to radiation, or deprived of sleep for weeks. Did these rumors reflect desperate invention, or fragments of real experimental attempts at human enhancement? We may never know. Much of the documentation was deliberately destroyed by retreating Japanese forces near the end of the war. Furnaces were lit day and night to burn records. Entire sections of the facility were demolished. The few blueprints and logs that survived do so only in fragments. After the war, a veil of silence descended on Unit 731, one reinforced not just by Japan, but by the very nations who defeated her. In a little-known post-war arrangement, the United States granted immunity to many of the scientists involved in exchange for access to their research. General Ishii and others were never prosecuted for war crimes. Unlike Nuremberg, there was no Tokyo equivalent trial for Unit 731's inner circle. This deal remains controversial to this day. Why would a nation like the U.S., championing justice and international law, agree to such terms? Was the data truly that valuable? Or was there something else in those records? Something too provocative, too unsettling, to ever fully disclose? In the years since, new allegations have surfaced, documents quietly declassified, testimonies from aging participants, and investigations by independent researchers. Some claim that Unit 731's research was not abandoned but absorbed. Its lessons continued in Cold War-era experiments both in Asia and abroad. Others point to unexplained outbreaks near the facility in the late 1940s. Plague, anthrax, and strange fevers that ravaged rural communities. Was this simply the long tale of war, or the unintended legacy of weapons tested and then buried, both literally and bureaucratically? Then there are the more speculative claims that Ishii's work went far beyond bacteriology, possibly into areas bordering on chemical mind control, surgical transformation, or even early cybernetic studies. These claims are difficult to substantiate. Most are based on hearsay and many dismiss them as the product of conspiracy thinking. And yet, considering the scope of what has been proven, how far-fetched can the rest really be? What is known is unsettling enough. Thousands died in agony. Data was harvested in exchange for silence, and the individuals responsible lived long, comfortable lives, some going on to teach in medical schools, publish research, and enjoy full pensions. Today, the ruins of Unit 731 still stand, though much of the complex has been reclaimed by weeds and time. A museum now occupies part of the site, where visitors walk quietly past glass cases filled with surgical tools, faded photographs, and fragments of preserved documents. The air inside is still heavy, almost reluctant to let go of what happened here. And yet, questions persist. Why were so many experiments carried out that had no clear application to wartime strategy? Why were entire villages infected and monitored from afar? Why did so many Allied powers choose silence over prosecution? What secrets still lie buried in the vaults of military archives in Tokyo and Washington? Unit 731 is more than a historical atrocity. It is a shadow, cast not only over the war, but over the ethics of science, the nature of secrecy, and the uncomfortable proximity between progress and cruelty. What price was paid for the knowledge obtained in those frozen laboratories? And how much of it remains hidden from view? In the remote forests of Thuringia, Germany, a narrow road winds through dense pine and silent hills. Today, the area feels untouched, almost serene. But buried beneath the calm is a place that once pulsed with unnatural urgency. Concrete bunkers, sealed tunnels, and rusting remains of facilities long since abandoned. This is the site of Ohrdruf, a Nazi military complex linked to an enduring and unsettling question. Did Nazi Germany test a nuclear device before the Allies? And if so, why has the evidence vanished? By 1945, the Third Reich was crumbling. The Allies closed in from the west, the Soviets from the east, and Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year empire lay in ruins. Yet even as cities were reduced to rubble, high-priority operations continued in secrecy, especially those related to Wunderwaffe, or miracle weapons. The most feared of these were Germany's rumored advances in atomic technology. Mainstream history records that the Nazi nuclear program, despite early promise, fell behind due to internal disorganization, limited resources, and conflicting priorities. Germany never produced a functional atomic bomb, and their nuclear scientists, including Werner Heisenberg, were decades behind the Manhattan Project, at least according to official accounts. But what if that's not the full story? In 2005, a German historian named Rainer Karlsch reignited a long-simmering debate. In his book Hitler's Bomb, he proposed that the Nazis may have conducted limited nuclear tests near the end of the war, possibly in March 1945, at the very site of Ohrdruf. The evidence he cited included declassified Soviet reports, wartime testimonies, and soil samples showing elevated radiation levels that, he argued, could not be explained by conventional weapons alone. Even more provocative were the whispers of lost footage, film reels allegedly shot by Nazi propaganda teams to document the success of an experimental device. These reels, said to have shown a blinding flash, a rising mushroom cloud, and charred test subjects, possibly animals, have never surfaced. But their rumored existence lingers in the archives of both Western and Eastern intelligence services. If true, what was on those reels? And why would such footage be suppressed by all sides? To understand the plausibility of the claim, we must return to the foundations of Nazi Germany's nuclear ambitions. In 1938, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann achieved the first nuclear fission, a discovery that triggered a global race for atomic weaponry. Early on, Germany held a technological edge. Their scientists were among the world's most advanced, and the regime quickly recognized the potential strategic advantage. However, political infighting, mismanagement, and Hitler's erratic priorities diverted crucial support. By 1942, the program was split between competing institutions, and the Nazis placed more faith in rocketry and jet propulsion, or so it seemed. Karlsch and others argue that elements within the SS and Nazi research divisions may have continued atomic research under deeper secrecy, beyond the reach of Allied intelligence. They point to facilities like the mine shafts of Jonastal, near Ohrdruf, where massive underground chambers were excavated in total secrecy. The construction was rushed and brutal. Prisoners from Buchenwald and other camps were forced to dig through solid rock, their purpose never fully explained. What was being built beneath the mountains? Some researchers claim that in March 1945, a device, described alternately as a dirty bomb or a crude fission weapon, was detonated near Ohrdruf. According to these accounts, a handful of observers witnessed the event. A blast of intense light, a shockwave, and a rising cloud resembling the now infamous mushroom shape associated with nuclear detonations. Soviet intelligence reports uncovered years later seemed to corroborate parts of this claim, noting unexplained spikes in radiation and the destruction of test subjects. But the science is complicated. Critics argue that the soil samples, while anomalous, could be contaminated by post-war activities. The descriptions of the explosion might match conventional weapons, especially fuel-air explosives or high-intensity chemical blasts. And of course, no confirmed blueprints or successful uranium enrichment methods have been found in German wartime archives. Still, the mystery endures. Why were certain wartime records from the Nazi nuclear program classified for decades by both the United States and the Soviet Union? Why were Allied forces so quick to secure sites like Hechingen and Haigerloch, where German atomic research had been conducted even before they addressed nearby humanitarian crises? And what of the scientists themselves? Some of the key figures in the Nazi atomic program, including Kurt Diebner and Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, were detained and interrogated after the war, yet their statements during Operation Epsilon, secret recordings made by British intelligence while the scientists were held at Farm Hall, remain ambiguous. Upon hearing of the Hiroshima bombing, several expressed astonishment. But others, like Diebner, made cryptic remarks about having already tested a device of their own. Were they bluffing, misremembering, or hinting at something more? Then there's the film. Numerous accounts, mostly anecdotal, mention reels of Nazi footage documenting not just advanced rocketry, but high-yield experimental blasts. Some former intelligence operatives claimed that such footage was confiscated by Allied forces and remains sealed within classified archives. Others suggest it may have been destroyed altogether, too controversial, too destabilizing, even decades later. If such footage does exist, its suppression raises profound questions. Was it hidden to protect post-war alliances? To avoid a public reckoning over how far Nazi science had truly advanced? Or perhaps because it might reveal that the line between victor and vanquished, science and secrecy, was thinner than we'd like to believe. Today, Ohrdruf is a quiet place. Tourists rarely visit. The bunkers are sealed or collapsed, and most locals speak of the war only in vague terms. But beneath the earth, traces may still remain, of tests, of records, of technology lost or hidden. Was Nazi Germany closer to building an atomic bomb than history admits? Did they test a device in the dying days of the war, only for the evidence to be buried with the regime? Or is this just another layer of myth built atop real fear? Fear of what might have happened had just a few circumstances been different. And if there was a camera rolling, capturing the moment, frame by frame, where is that footage now? Locked in a vault? Destroyed? Or waiting undiscovered in some forgotten archive? A flickering record of a nightmare never fully told? Fog rolls slowly across the English Channel, blanketing the sea in a ghostly silence. On the southern coast of England, concrete pillboxes sit half-buried in grass and thyme, their gun slits still facing toward the waves. Today, they seem quaint, curiosities from a war long past. But in 1940, they were part of Britain's last line of defense against a looming nightmare, a full-scale German invasion. The plan was called Unternehmen Seelöwe, Operation Celian. On paper, it was the Third Reich's blueprint for crossing the Channel, overwhelming British forces and forcing the surrender of an isolated island nation. But despite months of preparation, troop movements, and propaganda, the invasion never came. Or did it? In the decades since, historians have pieced together fragments of this never-executed plan, drawings of amphibious craft, training manuals, estimates of British resistance. Yet gaps remain. Documents disappeared, orders were changed, and some accounts suggest that Operation Celian may have been far more complex and far more real than the post-war narrative suggests. Could there be more to the story than we've been told? The threat of invasion began in the summer of 1940, shortly after France fell to German forces. Hitler turned his attention westward, toward Britain, now standing alone against Nazi expansion. From the shores of Calais to the beaches of Cherbourg, German troops were positioned along the Channel. Barges were requisitioned. Engineers began modifying civilian vessels for military use. The Luftwaffe was ordered to gain air superiority in preparation for an amphibious landing. Operation Celian was set in motion. The initial plan involved a massive landing stretching from Ramsgate to Lyme Bay. German infantry would storm the beaches, seize key ports, and advance rapidly toward London. Paratroopers would neutralize inland defenses, and once the capital fell, the remaining British forces would be isolated and overrun. Yet even as these details were being drafted, disagreements surfaced within the German High Command. The Kriegsmarine, woefully outmatched by the Royal Navy, warned of disastrous losses. The Luftwaffe's failure to destroy the RAF in the Battle of Britain further eroded confidence. By September, Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. That is the official account. But as with many events in the fog of war, the reality may be more nuanced, and perhaps more mysterious. In the years following the war, documents surfaced that hinted at alternative invasion routes, revised plans, and even training exercises conducted under extreme secrecy. One set of documents, recovered from a burned-out bunker in Bavaria, contained hand-drawn maps of southern England, not just of major cities, but of rural supply lines, railway crossings, and obscure coastal villages. Why such detail if the invasion had been abandoned? Other files, some partially declassified, described German intelligence efforts to infiltrate British coastal defenses, to test weaknesses, to identify sympathizers. One curious report mentions disguised agents landing on British shores, observing troop deployments, and disappearing without a trace. Were these isolated incidents, or part of a deeper preparation for an invasion that was never formally canceled? Then there is the question of the missing archives. After the war, Allied investigators searched German military facilities for all records relating to Operation Celian. Many were found, but others, according to internal memos, were absent. Entire volumes of planning materials had been removed, lost, or destroyed. Some researchers believe that an alternate version of the invasion plan existed, one known only to Hitler's inner circle. Could there have been a second, more covert strategy? One focused not on open invasion, but on destabilization and internal collapse? British records, too, raise questions. In 1940, MI5 and the Home Guard were on high alert for German saboteurs and collaborators. Several high-profile arrests occurred, individuals accused of signaling to enemy aircraft or harboring German agents. Yet few details were released, and the cases were quietly dropped after the war. Could these have been early signs of infiltration tied to an invasion plan that was more psychological than physical? Perhaps most curious is the so-called Black Book, compiled by the SS as part of the planned occupation of Britain. Officially titled Sonderfahndungsliste GB, it listed over 2,800 individuals, politicians, journalists, intellectuals, who were to be arrested immediately upon invasion. The existence of the book is not in dispute, but several names appeared that raise eyebrows. Minor bureaucrats, obscure clerics, even retired officers who had little political significance. Why were they targeted? Did the Nazis have intelligence on hidden networks of resistance? Or were they anticipating more opposition than the British government had ever revealed? Some fringe theories go further, suggesting that Operation Sea Lion was never about a traditional landing at all, but a cover for something more experimental. The testing of psychological warfare, the seeding of disinformation, or even the deployment of early prototypes for seaborne or aerial assault vehicles that were never officially documented. There are whispers, unverified but persistent, that in the final weeks before the invasion was postponed, German crews filmed rehearsals on the Baltic Sea using scaled-down mock-ups of English towns. If such footage existed, it has never been publicly shown. Were these routine drills, or something more, visual aids for a mission whose full scope remains unknown? Today, the remnants of Operation Sea Lion lie scattered across Europe. In museums, yellowed invasion maps and rusted landing craft models offer a glimpse into what might have been. In the British countryside, bunkers, anti-tank blocks, and coastal trenches remain, a silent testament to a battle that never came. But the documents, the intelligence files, the unexplained gaps in both British and German archives, they linger like shadows. Did Hitler truly abandon the invasion? Or did its purpose evolve into something else entirely? Were there secondary plans, now lost, that involved infiltration, sabotage, or even a long-game strategy to destabilize Britain from within? And if those lost plans were ever found, tucked away in a forgotten file box, a mislabeled reel of film, or a sealed intelligence dossier, what would they reveal? A failed ambition? Or a mystery that still shapes the way we view the war that almost reached Britain's shores? The Arctic Ocean is a realm of silence and frost, where ice sheets drift like white continents and the sun disappears for months at a time. In the pale northern light, jagged peaks of frozen water rise like ancient monuments. Below the surface, the sea holds its secrets, cold, dark, and undisturbed. It is here, in this remote and unforgiving expanse, that rumors persist of a Nazi convoy that vanished without a trace, a ghost fleet, unmarked ships, a mission that no logbook records and no survivor recalls. What really happened in the Arctic waters during the final years of World War II? Between 1941 and 1945, the Arctic Sea became one of the war's most dangerous supply routes. British and American convoys sailed from Scotland and Iceland to deliver aid to the Soviet Union through the northern ports of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. These missions were fraught with danger, not only from weather and icebergs, but from German U-boats, surface raiders, and aerial assaults. But the mystery in question does not concern Allied convoys. Rather, it centers on a little-known and often overlooked German naval operation, one that may have never been officially recorded, yet left behind a trail of whispers, strange sightings, and unanswered questions. In early 1945, as the Third Reich teetered on the edge of collapse, there were reports of a secret convoy dispatched from the northern Norwegian port of Narvik, deep into the Arctic Ocean. Eyewitnesses, local fishermen, coastal observers, even Allied intelligence sources, claimed to have seen several ships, including what appeared to be heavily modified freighters, moving north under cover of polar darkness. No insignia, no official markings, no clear destination. And then, nothing. The convoy was never seen again. No wreckage washed ashore, no distress signals were intercepted. No official German records, post-war testimonies, or naval logs mention such an operation. Yet the story has survived, retold in fragments by Arctic sailors, Soviet radar operators, and even a handful of declassified British intelligence memos. What was the purpose of this convoy, and where did it go? One theory suggests the ships were transporting treasure, Nazi gold, looted art, or top-secret documents, meant to be hidden in the far north until they could be retrieved in more favorable times. This idea is not without precedent. Similar claims have been made about German U-boats fleeing to South America and about treasure trains lost in the forests of Poland. But the Arctic, a place where no human settlement could easily reach, and where even survival for a day required immense preparation. Others believe the convoy may have been a scientific expedition. Nazi Germany was deeply invested in polar research and meteorological data. In fact, the Germans had established several clandestine Arctic weather stations during the war, including Schatzgräber on Alexandra Land, only discovered by accident years later. Could this convoy have been an effort to establish or evacuate a similar outpost, or something more? There are also more speculative theories. According to some, the convoy was carrying personnel, scientists, engineers, or SS officers, along with experimental technology or weapon prototypes. In this version of events, the Arctic served as a final refuge for research too sensitive to fall into Allied hands. Submerged laboratories, ice-shrouded bunkers, remote islands chosen precisely because of their isolation. If such a base existed, where is it now? Some point to Novaya Zemlya, a long and desolate archipelago deep in Russian Arctic waters. Decades later, the Soviets would use it as a testing site for nuclear weapons. But during the war, it remained largely untouched, an ideal place, perhaps, to hide something that needed to stay hidden. One of the more persistent threads in this mystery comes from Allied naval intelligence intercepts. A declassified British report from March 1945 refers cryptically to unusual enemy movements in the Arctic Sea. No further elaboration is given, but attached is a hand-drawn map showing a dotted line that veers far north of the usual naval routes. There are no coordinates, no destination, just a question mark where the line ends. Even decades later, satellite scans have shown no trace of wreckage or settlement in that region. Yet Arctic ice moves and swallows, and the sea preserves secrets well. Could the ghost convoy have simply been lost to the elements? The Arctic is a merciless environment. Sudden ice storms, shifting pack ice, and sub-zero temperatures could doom even the most prepared mission. It's entirely possible that the ships were caught in a sudden freeze, trapped in ice, and eventually dragged beneath the surface, lost to time and tide. But if so, why was there no trace? No debris, no oil slick, no cry for help? And why, even after the war, did both Western and Soviet authorities remain strangely silent on the matter? In the 1990s, a joint German-Russian expedition reportedly attempted to investigate wartime activity in the Barents Sea. Their stated mission was to locate sunken ships and forgotten wrecks. They returned with little fanfare and no public report. Members of the team have declined interviews. Some speculate they found something unexpected, something still classified. Today, the mystery of the Arctic ghost convoy remains unsolved. There is no definitive proof it ever existed, no confirmed logs, no physical remains. And yet, the story persists, passed on in old letters, naval legends, and the quiet observations of people who had no reason to fabricate what they saw. What would drive the remnants of a collapsing empire to risk everything on a journey into one of the harshest environments on Earth? Was it desperation? Secrecy? or an attempt to preserve something the world was not yet meant to discover. And in the vast, frozen silence of the Arctic, how many secrets still rest beneath the ice, waiting for the day the thaw reveals them? The waves lap quietly along the coastlines of the Philippine archipelago, where jungle meets the sea in a tangled tapestry of green and gold. Beneath the surface, coral reefs sway gently in the current, hiding the remains of countless wrecks, some from typhoons, others from war. But among them, it is said, lie ships that never made it to their final destinations. Ships not filled with soldiers or supplies, but with gold. Tons of it. They are known as the Golden Lily treasure ships, a name as poetic as it is ominous. Allegedly part of an ultra-secret operation led by Imperial Japan during World War II, these vessels were tasked with transporting looted treasure from across Asia to the home islands. But many never returned. Their cargo, gold bars, gems, priceless religious artifacts, simply vanished. And with them, a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. The roots of the Golden Lily story trace back to the 1930s and 1940s, as Japan expanded its empire through Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Occupation forces plundered with ruthless efficiency. From banks in Manila to temples in Thailand, museums in China to private vaults in Indonesia, treasure of immense cultural and material value was seized, often at gunpoint, and consolidated under the direction of high-ranking members of the Japanese elite. According to several researchers, including the controversial authors Sterling and Peggy Seagrave, the operation was overseen by members of the imperial family itself, with Prince Yasuhito Chichibu, brother to Emperor Hirohito, allegedly leading what was codenamed Kin no Yuri, or the Golden Lily Project. It was, if true, a vast logistical undertaking. Trains, trucks, and ships were used to ferry gold, jewels, and priceless relics to hidden depots across the Philippines, where they were either to be shipped to Japan or buried in elaborate underground chambers. Some shipments are said to have reached their destinations. Others were intercepted and sunk by Allied submarines. But many, it seems, simply disappeared, either lost at sea or hidden so well that they've never been found. In the immediate aftermath of the war, as American forces liberated the Philippines and Japan surrendered, rumors of hidden treasure began to spread. Locals spoke of secret tunnels, booby-trapped caverns, and strange Japanese maps covered in cryptic symbols. Some swore they saw gold being offloaded under cover of night. Others told of tortured engineers forced to seal themselves inside vaults to ensure no knowledge of the caches would survive. The most well-known and contentious claim centers around a man named Rogelio Roxas, a Filipino locksmith and amateur treasure hunter. In the 1970s, Roxas claimed to have discovered one such hidden chamber near Baguio City. Inside, he said, were stacked gold bars and a life-sized golden Buddha filled with jewels. But before he could secure or publicize the treasure, he was allegedly arrested, tortured, and the hoard confiscated by forces loyal to Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos. Roxas's story sparked international headlines, culminating in a court case decades later in Hawaii. While some dismissed his account as fabrication or delusion, others noted that key aspects of his testimony were corroborated by physical evidence and by the curious financial ascent of the Marcos regime during the 1970s and 80s. Could the vanished treasure of the Golden Lily have funded secret operations, offshore accounts, or political dynasties? If so, how much of it remains unclaimed? Despite the wealth of testimony, no definitive inventory of Golden Lily treasure has ever been found. The Japanese government has consistently denied any official involvement in systematic looting or hidden war treasure. Likewise, no surviving documentation from the Imperial Archives clearly outlines such an operation. Skeptics argue that the Golden Lily narrative is an amalgamation of myth, wartime chaos, and post-war conspiracy thinking. But others disagree. Declassified U.S. intelligence documents from the late 1940s reveal that Allied forces were indeed aware of Japanese efforts to conceal treasure in the Philippines. Operations were conducted under the guidance of General Edward Lansdale, a former OSS operative, to locate and, some claim, recover portions of the hidden gold. According to some versions of this story, elements of the treasure were quietly funneled into black budget programs or used to finance anti-communist operations during the early Cold War. If these reports are accurate, it suggests not only that the Golden Lily treasure existed, but that it may have been rediscovered and suppressed for geopolitical purposes. And then there are the maps. Several encoded Japanese maps, some carved into stone, others scrawled onto parchment or silk, have surfaced over the years, often accompanied by legends passed down from veterans, treasure hunters, or surviving members of the engineering corps forced to build the burial chambers. Some of these maps have been studied with ground-penetrating radar, revealing anomalies underground. Others appear to lead to nothing, but none have ever led to a confirmed hoard. Could the maps be real but purposefully misleading? Was this disinformation, or part of an effort to prevent rediscovery? The oceans and jungles of the Philippines remain littered with wartime wreckage, Japanese gunboats rusting in hidden bays, unexploded ordnance buried beneath decades of overgrowth. But somewhere, it's believed, lies more than rusted metal. Caves collapsed, sealed bunkers lined with gold leaf, sunken freighters carrying fortunes lost to the tides. If even a portion of the Golden Lily treasure is real, the implications are staggering. The sheer value, estimated in the tens, perhaps hundreds of billions of dollars, could rewrite the economic history of post-war Asia. It could shed light on shadowy alliances, secret funding operations, and the real cost of rebuilding after the war. But perhaps most intriguing of all is this: how many ships still lie undiscovered in the depths, their holds filled with looted treasure, silent witnesses to a forgotten war within a war? And if one were found today, whose story would it truly tell? In the heart of Warsaw, near the banks of the Vistula River, the Polish National Bank stands as a symbol of the country's financial sovereignty. Today, its walls are unassuming, modern, secure, efficient. But in 1939, they guarded something extraordinary. Deep underground, behind reinforced vault doors, lay over 80 tons of gold, coins and bars, the carefully amassed wealth of an independent nation. And then, it vanished. The story of the Polish gold reserve is unlike any wartime treasure tale. It does not begin with looting or conquest. Instead, it begins with foresight and with urgency. In the summer of 1939, as clouds of war gathered over Europe, the Polish government made a critical decision. Hitler's intentions had become unmistakable. Diplomats failed to hold the line. Knowing an invasion was imminent, Polish officials authorized the evacuation of the nation's gold. It was a monumental task, more than 20,000 gold bars and coins, valued at over $80 million at the time, to be moved across continents. The initial plan was precise. The gold would be taken from Warsaw to the southeastern town of Strij by train, then by truck into Romania. From there, it would pass through several neutral or friendly countries before reaching a safe haven, possibly France, the UK, or even further abroad. But as the Germans advanced and the Soviets invaded from the east, the route grew perilous. The gold was hidden, split up, rerouted, and guarded by a shrinking number of loyal officers. Some portions made it out, others disappeared without explanation. Where did it all go? Official records, to a degree, tell the story. The first phase of the escape saw the gold reach Romania. The Romanians, caught in a delicate balancing act between neutrality and fear of German reprisal, allowed the Polish treasure to cross their borders, barely. From there, it was loaded onto ships bound for Constantinople and then overland to Beirut, still under French control. It was a journey filled with risk. The gold moved through territories shadowed by spies and shifting allegiances. It traveled by train, truck, ship, and sometimes under armed escort. According to government accounts, a significant portion eventually reached France, where it was stored in the Banque de France and, for a time, safeguarded. But not all of it. As France fell in 1940, what had been considered safe became vulnerable. The Polish government in exile, now based in London, ordered a new evacuation, this time to Africa. The gold was shipped to Dakar in French West Africa under the control of the Vichy regime. From there, it entered a diplomatic and logistical limbo. Efforts to retrieve it stalled. Access was denied. Communications broke down. The Allies made attempts to recover the gold. Some succeeded. In 1944, British and Polish agents managed to retrieve a portion from Dakar and reroute it to London. But even then, amounts remained unaccounted for. Some sources claimed additional stores were hidden in West African vaults. Others alleged secret transfers to Argentina, Switzerland, or Spain. And some believe it was stolen. The gold's journey, well documented in places, opaque in others, leaves tantalizing gaps. According to a 1948 internal British memo, certain gold bars traced to Poland had been found circulating on the black market in Lisbon and Tangier during the war. If true, who moved them? How did they slip past the French or British authorities? Could elements within the Vichy government or private banking interests have diverted portions of the reserve for their own purposes? Some modern researchers point to suspicious patterns in post-war international gold flows. In particular, they question sudden surges in private holdings within certain European banks, movements difficult to explain by conventional trade or market activity alone. Could these represent fragments of the missing Polish gold? Then there's the matter of the documents. In the early 2000s, declassified archives revealed that portions of the correspondence between the Polish government in exile and Allied financial institutions had been withheld, documents redacted or simply missing. Requests to examine full wartime inventories were denied, even to Polish researchers. Why? Was it a matter of security or something more political? Compounding the mystery are the accounts from local witnesses in Romania, Turkey, and Lebanon, who, years later, described military trucks moving under heavy guard, secret night convoys, and unexplained explosions near mountain passes, suggesting that not all shipments reached their intended ports. Was a portion of the gold buried to prevent its capture? Or did entire transports vanish into the fog of war? The Polish government has made efforts to account for the missing gold. By 2012, estimates suggested that the vast majority had been recovered or reimbursed through post-war agreements with France, Britain, and the United States. Yet some officials remain skeptical. Quiet investigations continue. Treasure hunters still scour old maps and forgotten records. And in the background, a deeper unease lingers. If even a small portion remains hidden, what secrets could it reveal? What does the root of the gold say about the decisions made in desperation? About who could be trusted and who took advantage? And if certain hands intercepted it, where are those bars now? Gold leaves no scent, but it leaves marks. In books, in bank records, in sudden fortunes that appear where none should exist. For a time, the Polish gold was a nation's lifeline, carried across half the world to ensure survival. Today, it is a puzzle with many of its pieces accounted for, but never all. Is the remainder still hidden in a forgotten vault beneath African soil? Lying beneath the floorboards of a villa in the Pyrenees? Or has it long since been melted, recast, and returned to circulation, its origin lost, its story dissolved into silence? In the vaults of banks, in the archives of intelligence agencies, and perhaps still in the soil of a forgotten roadside, does a final clue remain, waiting for someone to follow the trail to its end? Behind the ancient walls of Vatican City, where cobblestone streets echo with the footsteps of pilgrims and centuries of history, stands the Apostolic Palace, its domed skyline watching silently over the city of Rome. Here, within ornate halls lined with Renaissance frescoes and quiet chapels, the spiritual heart of the Catholic Church resides. But during the waning days of the Second World War, some believe these same corridors bore witness to something far more clandestine, an invisible network of escape, quietly guiding Nazi officers and collaborators away from justice. As the Allies pushed deeper into occupied Europe in 1944 and 1945, the collapse of Nazi Germany appeared inevitable. Cities lay in ruin, the SS was disbanding, and war criminals knew that Nuremberg, or worse, awaited them. But many did not stay to face judgment. Instead, thousands vanished across borders, continents, and oceans. Among these fleeing figures were high-ranking SS officers, members of the Gestapo, and collaborators from across Eastern and Southern Europe. Their escape route was known by many names: the Rat Lines, the Underground Railroad of the Reich, or simply the Corridor. And at the heart of these whispered trails, according to both historians and war crimes investigators, was the city of Rome. Why Rome? And more pointedly, why the Vatican? In the chaotic aftermath of Italy's surrender and German occupation, Rome became a city of shadows. Displaced persons, refugees, wounded soldiers, and Nazi sympathizers all moved through the same narrow streets. The Vatican, as a sovereign and neutral state, held a unique position. Its territory was immune to Allied and Axis interference. Its diplomatic channels remained open, and its vast humanitarian network, organized through the Catholic Church, extended into every corner of Europe. Officially, Vatican authorities insisted on strict neutrality during the war. They offered aid to prisoners, protested deportations, and sheltered those fleeing violence. But as with any institution navigating war, neutrality can be complex. And somewhere in that gray zone, a different kind of assistance may have taken shape. According to post-war investigations and declassified intelligence reports, elements within the church may have played a role in quietly aiding the escape of Nazi officials. The most commonly cited figure is Bishop Alois Hudal, a Viennese cleric stationed in Rome, known for his sympathy toward National Socialism and his open criticism of the Nuremberg trials. In 1946, Hudal published a memoir describing the Allies as victors thirsting for vengeance. Privately, he was more than a critic. Evidence suggests Hudal used his position at the Collegio Teutonico, a German seminary inside Vatican territory, to supply forged documents, shelter fugitives, and liaise with contacts who could move individuals southward, often to the port cities of Genoa or Naples, and from there to Argentina, Brazil, or Syria. Who were the beneficiaries? Among those believed to have escaped through ratline networks were Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, Franz Stangl, commandant of Treblinka, and Josef Mengele, the infamous doctor of Auschwitz. While not all of them were directly aided by the Vatican, many used documents issued by church-run refugee organizations, Red Cross passes, baptismal certificates, and false identities. Was this help offered knowingly? Or was the network manipulated by those who presented themselves as innocent refugees? Some defenders of the Vatican argue that chaos, misinformation, and the vast number of displaced persons in post-war Europe made screening impossible. They point out that humanitarian organizations run by the Church were overwhelmed, and that a forged baptismal record or false claim of persecution could easily deceive those providing aid. It's true that millions of people were on the move, survivors of camps, prisoners of war, stateless civilians, all seeking safety, food, and a path forward. But others argue that the system was not simply chaotic, it was structured. Routes were consistent, identities were altered in predictable patterns. And in some cases, individuals like Bishop Hoodall openly expressed their belief that saving these men from trial was a moral imperative, a way to preserve what they saw as a bulwark against communism. Indeed, the onset of the Cold War changed many priorities. Former Nazis, once hunted, were quietly repurposed as assets in the struggle against the Soviet Union. Intelligence agencies on both sides, especially the CIA and the Gehlen organization in West Germany, made use of these individuals. It raises a difficult question. If Western powers were willing to overlook the past for political gain, did the Vatican simply do the same? Or was it acting from a deeper ideological alignment? Then there's the money trail. Several investigators have suggested that gold looted by the Nazis, possibly passed through Swiss banks, helped finance the escape routes. A 1998 U.S. State Department report, based on declassified files, noted the possible involvement of church-connected charities in laundering Nazi assets, though no direct evidence tied senior Vatican leadership to such transactions. Still, the patterns remain troubling. Why were certain fugitives given safe haven in Catholic monasteries? Why did some travel under church-issued travel papers? And why did official Vatican archives remain closed to investigators for decades? In 2020, Pope Francis authorized the release of thousands of documents from the wartime and immediate post-war period. Researchers hope these papers will shed light on what the Vatican knew and when. Already, early findings suggest that church leadership was more aware of the plight of Jews during the Holocaust than previously acknowledged. But whether these archives will reveal direct ties to Nazi escape networks remains uncertain. What we are left with is a tangle of half-revealed paths and unanswered questions. The Vatican, as both a spiritual and geopolitical force, was uniquely positioned during one of history's darkest moments. It helped countless victims. But did it also, knowingly or not, help the perpetrators? Was the rat line a rogue effort by a few sympathetic clergy? A tolerated operation guided by geopolitical pragmatism? Or part of a deeper, unspoken alliance forged in the shadows of post-war realignment? And in the silence of sealed records and unspoken oaths, what truths still lie hidden behind the Vatican walls? The morning sun rose over the San Francisco Bay, casting a golden shimmer across the water as gulls wheeled silently above. It was August 16, 1942, just months after Pearl Harbor, and America's west coast was on high alert. Every strange object in the sky, every unidentified vessel on the horizon, was cause for concern. The war had come close, and the Navy's eyes were everywhere. So when the airship L-8 lifted off from Treasure Island that Sunday morning, its bulbous silver envelope rising steadily into the crisp air, it was just another patrol, a routine mission meant to watch for Japanese submarines prowling off the coast. 2 experienced crewmen were aboard, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams. Both men were seasoned aviators. Both were calm, capable, and trusted. They never returned. Or rather, they did, but only their ship. A few hours later, just past noon, the L-8 drifted silently back toward land. It was low and unstable, sagging slightly on one side. It brushed the rooftops of Daly City, then scraped against utility poles before finally coming to rest in the middle of a suburban street. Its impact so soft that some residents thought it was part of a military demonstration. But when emergency crews opened the cabin, what they found was chilling. The gondola was empty. No sign of a struggle. No evidence of malfunction. The radio was working. The parachutes were still on board. Life jackets were in place. The engines were functional, even the payload of depth charges remained undisturbed, but Cody and Adams were gone, vanished mid-flight, without distress signals, without explanation, and without a single witness who saw them depart the aircraft. The L-8's final moments, as pieced together from radar reports and ground sightings, tell only part of the story. At approximately 7:42 a.m., it left Treasure Island with clear skies and calm winds. At 7:50, the crew radioed in. They had reached their designated patrol sector, roughly 5 miles off the coast of San Francisco, near the Farallon Islands. They reported nothing unusual. Shortly after 8 o'clock a.m., the blimp began to descend rapidly. A nearby fishing vessel, the Daisy Gray, observed it hovering low over the water, almost unnaturally still. The fisherman assumed it had spotted something, perhaps a submarine, and was preparing to drop a depth charge. But the charges were never released. The L-8 lingered, then slowly rose and began an unsteady path back toward land. After that, it flew without human control. The Navy would later confirm that the altitude valves had been set in such a way that the airship could remain aloft for hours, even without a pilot. But why would both men abandon the blimp, if they had at all? Investigators swarmed the scene. Theories were immediate and varied. Some suspected a mechanical failure, but the engines, instruments, and fuel lines were found to be in good working order. Others suggested that the crew may have fallen out accidentally while making repairs. But safety harnesses were unused, and both men were trained to handle in-flight maintenance without risk. The cabin door was closed and latched. No damage indicated an emergency or forced exit. Sabotage was briefly considered, but no signs of foul play were found. Both men had passed psychological evaluations and had no known enemies. There were no ransom notes, no communications from enemy agents. The men were never seen or heard from again. The simplest explanation, that the crew fell overboard while attempting to investigate something outside the gondola, was quickly adopted as the official position, but it remained deeply unsatisfying. Why would two experienced officers exit the cabin over open ocean with no distress call, no emergency visible, and no indication of an airborne anomaly, unless they saw something that compelled them to? That's where the mystery deepens, and speculation begins. Over the decades, theories have ranged from the plausible to the uncanny. Some suggest that the crew may have spotted a suspicious object in the water, perhaps a foreign submarine or a strange vessel, and attempted to lower themselves for closer inspection. One theory posits that they may have tried to board the object via ladder or rope, only to slip or be pulled away. But again, no one saw such an event, and no wreckage or bodies were ever recovered. Others point to the wartime context. Could the crew have been captured by an enemy submarine? Japanese subs had, in fact, operated off the California coast during the early months of the war, and a handful of merchant ships were attacked in those waters. But capturing a low-flying airship crew in broad daylight without leaving behind any evidence would have been an extraordinary feat, and no Japanese records support such a claim. Then there are the more speculative interpretations. Some researchers have noted strange anomalies reported in the Pacific during the war: unusual radar blips, unmarked craft, unidentified aerial phenomena. In this context, the L-8 disappearance has occasionally been folded into broader patterns of unexplained wartime events. Could the crew have encountered something inexplicable? Something that prompted a response they didn't have time to explain? These theories, while lacking hard evidence, reflect the enduring unease surrounding the incident. Two men disappeared in full daylight, aboard a functioning aircraft within miles of one of the busiest urban areas on the West Coast. And yet, no answers have emerged. Today, the gondola of the L-8, later redesignated a Goodyear promotional blimp, sits in a museum. Its polished exterior gleams under exhibition lights. Children gaze through its windows. Most who see it know nothing of the story behind it. No plaque details the mystery. No official still photograph captures the moment of disappearance. But for those who study wartime anomalies, the L-8 remains one of the strangest unsolved cases of World War II. Why would two seasoned Navy men vanish from a working aircraft without a trace? What did they see or experience that led to their disappearance? And in the silence of that empty gondola, drifting above the California coast, is there still an echo of something unspoken, something lost in the clouds that morning in 1942? Inside the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, beneath vaulted ceilings and the quiet hush of centuries-old stone, lies a peculiar artifact. Tarnished by time and worn by reverence, it rests encased in glass, barely more than a weathered iron spearhead. And yet, legend claims it once pierced the side of Christ at the crucifixion. To the faithful, it is sacred. To the ambitious, it is said to grant unimaginable power. This is the Spear of Longinus, more commonly known as the Spear of Destiny, and among its most enigmatic admirers was Adolf Hitler, a man whose fixation with relics, myth, and occult power may have shaped more of World War II than history comfortably acknowledges. The story of the spear stretches back nearly 2,000 years. According to Christian tradition, a Roman centurion, identified in later texts as Gaius Cassius Longinus, thrust his spear into Jesus' side to ensure his death. Over the centuries, the lance became a relic of almost mystical importance, believed by some to grant divine favor, military success, and even invincibility to those who possessed it. Its legend passed from empire to empire. Charlemagne is said to have carried it into battle. Otto the Great, the first Holy Roman Emperor, was crowned with it at his side. Napoleon allegedly sought it and failed. And by the early 20th century, it had become a symbol of both religious devotion and imperial ambition, its resting place in the Hofburg treasury only adding to its aura of secrecy. But it wasn't until a young Austrian drifter, aimless and poor, entered the museum in 1912 that the story took a darker turn. Adolf Hitler, just 23 years old and scraping by in Vienna, visited the Hofburg several times during his youth. He wandered its vast exhibits, lingering, according to some biographers, for long stretches in front of the spear. What exactly passed through his mind in those moments is impossible to say. But decades later, when he rose to power, Hitler would return to Vienna not as an aimless artist, but as the Chancellor of Nazi Germany, and one of his first private orders, following the 1938 Anschluss, was to take possession of the spear. The artifact was removed under military guard and transported to Nuremberg, an act Hitler kept largely concealed from public knowledge. The question is, why? Was it merely symbolism? A trophy of imperial nostalgia? Or did Hitler believe, as some have suggested, that the spear truly granted power? There is no question that Nazi ideology was steeped in mysticism. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, built entire rituals around Germanic pagan symbols. Expeditions were sent to Tibet, the Arctic, and the Middle East in search of ancient knowledge and proof of Aryan supremacy. The Vril Society, which influenced many early members of the Nazi Party, openly dabbled in esotericism and occult belief. Within this context, the Spear of Destiny begins to feel less like a curiosity and more like a cornerstone. Authors such as Trevor Ravenscroft, in his controversial book The Spear of Destiny, 1973, claimed that Hitler's entire rise to power was somehow linked to his belief in the relic's power. According to Ravenscroft, whose sources remain disputed, Hitler believed that whoever possessed the spear held the fate of the world in their hands. Ravenscroft went further, suggesting that the spear was connected to ancient energies or forces, and that Hitler viewed himself not merely as a political leader, but as a vessel for something transcendent. Such claims are difficult to verify. Mainstream historians rightly caution against taking them at face value. but the behavior of the Nazi leadership. Its obsession with artifacts, symbols, and hidden knowledge is not in dispute. The spear's removal to Nuremberg, a city chosen by the Nazis as the ceremonial heart of their regime, suggests it held more than historical value in Hitler's eyes. And then, in the war's final days, the story takes a final, haunting twist. In April 1945, American forces entered Nuremberg after brutal street fighting. Among their first priorities was securing cultural and religious artifacts looted by the Nazis. The Spear of Destiny was found in a vault beneath the city, and just hours after its discovery, almost to the minute, Adolf Hitler took his own life in a Berlin bunker. Coincidence? Almost certainly, but the symbolism was not lost on those who remembered the legend, that whoever possessed the spear controlled the fate of the world, and that losing it meant death. The Allies returned the spear to Vienna, where it now rests once again in the Hofburg. But questions remain. Is the artifact on display truly the Spear of Longinus? Or is it a medieval copy, its legend inflated over time? Metallurgical testing has dated its components to the 7th or 8th century, far too late for it to have pierced Christ. Yet centuries of rulers believed it was authentic, and belief, as history has shown, can be as powerful as truth. Why did Hitler covet it so deeply? Did he see himself as part of a divine or apocalyptic destiny? Or was the spear simply one more thread in a vast tapestry of symbolic power woven by a regime obsessed with myth and ritual? Today, the Spear of Destiny remains behind glass, watched by silent cameras and curious eyes. Tourists pass it by, unaware of the weight it once carried, real or imagined, in the minds of emperors, generals, and dictators. But perhaps the more unsettling question is not whether the spear is real, but why so many believed in it. Why did so many risk everything to possess it? And in the quiet corners of history, where myth and ambition blur, does the Spear of Destiny still hold sway over the hearts of those who seek power, not through politics or war, but through something far older and far more mysterious? The winds move quietly across the northern plains of France, brushing over fields that once echoed with the thunder of war. Here, near the banks of the River Lice, wild grasses now grow over ground once churned by boots and artillery. In the early dawn mist, faint outlines of trenches and foxholes remain, eroded by time yet stubbornly present. But it was here, in the chaos of 1940, amid the violence of the German blitzkrieg and the desperate defense of France, that a British unit, the 1st Battalion of the Royal Norfolk Regiment, vanished under circumstances that remain shrouded in both silence and speculation. Not every mystery of World War II began in a secret bunker or across oceans. Some played out in broad daylight, witnessed by dozens, yet remain disturbingly unresolved. The date was May 27, 1940. The British Expeditionary Force, along with French and Belgian allies, was in retreat. Hitler's Wehrmacht had punched through the Ardennes and driven a wedge across northern France, encircling Allied forces. With the desperate evacuation at Dunkirk just days away, every British unit left behind was given one directive: hold the line as long as possible. The Royal Norfolks had been positioned in and around the small hamlet of Le Paradis, a cluster of farms and low buildings near Béthune. Their orders were to delay the German advance and protect the withdrawing British forces. Alongside them were other battalions of the 2nd Division, tasked with what amounted to a sacrificial rear guard. By all conventional accounts, the Norfolks fought valiantly. German records confirm that resistance was stiff and prolonged. The British were heavily outnumbered and outgunned. Artillery fire, tanks, and flamethrowers were deployed against them. Yet the battalion held firm throughout the day, retreating only when their position was finally overrun. But it's what happened after that confounds historians and investigators to this day. Of the approximately 99 men in the final detachment of the Royal Norfolks, none returned, At first, British High Command assumed they had been captured. After all, German forces, especially the SS Totenkopf division which had engaged them, were known to take large numbers of prisoners. Families back in England waited for word, but weeks passed. No names appeared on POW rolls. No letters came from camps. Eventually, the truth began to emerge, not from official channels, but from whispers among survivors and locals. French civilians in the area spoke of hearing bursts of gunfire after the fighting had ceased. Others claimed to have seen a group of British soldiers herded into a barn, hands above their heads. What happened next was only confirmed years later, after the war's end. 2 British soldiers, Privates Albert Pooley and William O'Callaghan, were discovered alive in a German hospital, having survived their wounds and subsequent capture. Upon their release, they testified that the Norfolks had indeed surrendered, only to be marched into a walled courtyard at a nearby farm and gunned down by SS troops under the command of Hauptsturmführer Fritz Knochlein. The bodies, according to them, had been left where they fell, partially buried or burned. And yet, when investigators visited the site in 1944, they found something puzzling. The mass grave was real. 47 bodies were recovered, their positions consistent with execution. Bullet casings matched Pooley's and O'Callaghan's account, but over 50 men remained unaccounted for. No graves, no remains, no records. The trail, it seemed, had simply vanished. Officially, the Le Paradis massacre has been documented and attributed to war crimes. Knochlein was tried at Nuremberg and executed in 1949. His role in the killings was undeniable. But even now, the case of the entire battalion's disappearance raises unresolved questions. Where are the missing men? Some researchers suggest they may have been taken to a second location and executed separately. Others propose that in the confusion of battle, bodies were misidentified or buried in unmarked sites destroyed by later shelling, but these remain speculative. The number of unaccounted-for soldiers is too large to dismiss as mere wartime chaos. Then come the more controversial theories. A handful of historians have explored the idea that some men may have escaped capture entirely, only to be taken by another German unit or perhaps by rogue elements of the SS not directly under Totenkopf command. These groups may have moved east or south with their prisoners and executed them far from the original site. If so, why were no remains found elsewhere? Why was there no mention in German war logs or captured correspondence? Others suggest more chilling possibilities. Was a cover-up orchestrated, perhaps by the Germans or even by Allied command, to prevent widespread panic or retaliation? Did early British leadership suppress the full scale of the massacre, fearing public reaction at home while evacuations were still underway? Some documents from the early weeks of June 1940 appear to reference missing units ambiguously, without naming the Norfolks directly. And then there's the strange account of a farmer, recorded years later, who claimed to have seen an officer in a British uniform, alive, limping, and speaking broken German, escorted away in a black car days after the battle. Was this real? Or a misremembered wartime echo? Today, in the village of Le Paradis, a memorial stands near the farm where the massacre occurred. The names of the known dead are inscribed in stone. Visitors leave flowers. Yet more than 50 men, names, lives, histories, remain missing from every ledger and every map. For some, this is a forgotten footnote of a larger war. For others, it remains a haunting wound in the record of valor and violence. What happened to the missing men of the Royal Norfolks? Were they buried in forgotten fields, executed in silence? Or did they vanish into a part of the war still hidden from view, buried not just in earth, but in secrecy? And if so, what else, after all these years, remains buried beside them? Beneath the soft glow of crystal chandeliers and the stiff quiet of diplomatic formality, the British Embassy in Ankara, Turkey, moved to the rhythms of high-level secrecy. Persian rugs muffled footsteps. Gilt-framed portraits of monarchs and statesmen lined the walls. In these rooms, as World War II raged across continents, messages were whispered, dispatches sealed, and the fate of entire regions quietly debated. But hidden in plain sight, among the servants who polished silverware and passed unnoticed through the halls, a man moved silently, not just carrying trays, but secrets. Secrets meant for Churchill's eyes only. Secrets that would cross a perilous bridge into enemy hands. The Germans knew him only by one name: Cicero. The year was 1943. Turkey, strategically positioned between East and West, remained officially neutral. Its capital, Ankara, was a hotbed of espionage, where Axis and Allied agents monitored one another with quiet desperation. And inside the British Embassy, where diplomacy danced closely with covert planning, someone was leaking information, high-level secrets, often top secret, many directly concerning Allied strategies and negotiations. The German Abwehr, the Nazi intelligence service, was the recipient, and for a time they could hardly believe their luck. Cicero, as the unknown informant was called, was supplying them with documents of stunning sensitivity. Notes from British cabinet meetings, coded updates on Allied troop movements, even early hints about the upcoming D-Day landings, though, crucially, without context or precise timing. Where was this intelligence coming from? At first, suspicion fell on diplomats, military attachés, and code clerks. But it would take months before British intelligence would look further down the social chain, and by then, the damage was done. The man later identified as Cicero was Elyesa Bosna, an Albanian-born valet working in the embassy's residence. Quiet, polite, and discreet, Bosna served Sir Hugh Knatchbull Hugeson, the British ambassador. He was trusted, granted access to rooms few others entered, and in that trust lay vulnerability. Bosna had a simple method. Each night, when the ambassador retired, he would slip into the study, photograph classified documents with a miniature camera, then replace them undisturbed. The photographs were passed to German agents in Ankara, and from there, relayed to Berlin. The impact? Unclear. Some historians argue that the intelligence Cicero provided was priceless, an internal view of British wartime thinking. Others claim that Berlin, ironically distrustful of the source's authenticity, often failed to act on the information. In at least one known case, Cicero warned of Allied plans to invade southern Europe through the Balkans. The Germans dismissed it as British disinformation. Months later, troops landed in Italy. But who exactly was Cicero? And was Bosna truly acting alone? After the war, Bosna publicly claimed his role, publishing a memoir titled "I Was Cicero." He described himself as motivated not by ideology, but by money. An opportunist rather than a true believer in the Nazi cause. He said he demanded large sums, paid in German marks. Ironically, much of this currency turned out to be counterfeit, produced by the Nazis themselves through Operation Bernhard, a secret forgery program aimed at collapsing the British economy. It was a fitting end, perhaps, for a spy tale rooted in deception. Yet doubts linger. Some researchers believe Bosna's narrative simplifies a more complex web. Was he really acting independently? Or did another power, possibly the Soviets or even a breakaway faction of Turkish intelligence, facilitate the leak, using him as a convenient scapegoat? Curiously, despite his claims and published confessions, neither British nor German archives contain the full picture. MI6, notoriously guarded with its records, has never fully declassified its internal investigations into the affair. And while Bosna's confession fits the basic timeline, there are inconsistencies. At one point, he claimed to have blackmailed embassy staff. At another, he he denied any confrontations. Furthermore, Cicero's information ceased abruptly in 1944. Bosna claimed he stopped spying after growing fearful of being caught. But could it have been something else? Had he outlived his usefulness? Or was he, as some have speculated, merely one of several agents feeding information to Berlin, one whose story just happened to be the most narratively convenient? Then there's the strange case of Ludwig Moisisch, the German attaché who handled Cicero in Ankara. In post-war interrogations, Moisisch described the meetings with his source in meticulous detail. He praised the quality of the documents, but admitted that German command often downplayed their importance. Strangely, Moisisch seemed to know very little about Cicero's background despite months of collaboration. Was this deliberate? Was there a conscious effort to protect the spy's identity even within the German chain of command? Or did another figure, yet unknown, stand between the valet and the Nazi war machine? Some fringe theories go further. Could Cicero have been a British double agent, leaking only selective information designed to mislead or overwhelm German intelligence? Could Bosna have been manipulated by forces far beyond his comprehension, used, then discarded? The truth remains elusive. Today, visitors to the old British Embassy building in Ankara see only another elegant stone structure behind iron gates. The rooms where secrets once passed hands are now used for routine diplomatic functions. The names of the war's great operatives, Philby, Dulles, Canaris, linger in the pages of history. But Cicero stands apart, a spy without a country, a valet turned ghost, whose motives may never have been fully understood, even by himself. And the questions remain. Was Elijah Bosna truly the sole Cicero, or merely the face of something deeper? How much did the Germans learn, and how much did they ignore? And if the full truth lies somewhere between files still classified and voices long silenced, what other secrets might still be hiding in the dust of locked archives, waiting to be read? The waves lapped quietly against the hull of a Soviet cruiser docked in Portsmouth Harbor, England. It was April 1956, a rare moment of diplomatic engagement during the early Cold War. The cruiser, the Orjonikidze, shimmered beneath a gray spring sky, flying the hammer and sickle alongside her polished decks. On board were high-ranking Soviet officials, including none other than Nikita Khrushchev and Nikolai Bulganin, visiting as guests of the British government. But beneath the surface, both figuratively and literally, something else was happening. Hidden from the fanfare of official receptions, a British diver slipped into the cold waters. His name was Commander Lionel Crabb, a decorated naval officer and one of Britain's most accomplished frogmen from the Second World War. Within minutes, he would vanish forever. Lionel Buster Crabb was no ordinary naval operative. During World War II, he had earned a reputation for courage and ingenuity. He was part of an elite group of Royal Navy divers tasked with disarming mines and inspecting the undersides of enemy ships. Operating in some of the most dangerous waters of the Mediterranean, often in complete darkness and under threat of enemy fire, Crabb made a name for himself by swimming beneath ships in Gibraltar and Italy, detecting sabotage devices planted by enemy frogmen. By the end of the war, he was considered one of the finest underwater operatives in the world. But as the years passed and the war gave way to a new kind of tension, the Cold War, Crabb found himself on the fringes of military relevance. He officially retired in the 1950s, though retirement in the world of espionage was rarely what it seemed. So when a Soviet cruiser carrying the top echelon of Moscow's leadership docked in a British port, intelligence services reportedly saw an opportunity, one that required a very particular set of skills. The mission, though never officially acknowledged, is believed to have been straightforward. Crabb would dive beneath the Orjonikidze to inspect its hull and propeller systems. At the time, Western analysts were eager to understand Soviet advancements in naval engineering, particularly in propulsion and stealth design. The hull of a ship, invisible to cameras or radar, could hold vital secrets. Crabb entered the water on April 19, 1956. He never surfaced. No distress signal was heard. No equipment was recovered. Inquiries were made, quietly, and within 48 hours a veil of secrecy had descended over the incident. What followed was a masterclass in obfuscation. The British government issued a brief and ambiguous statement. Crabb had been engaged in trials of certain underwater apparatus in Stokes Bay and had gone missing. Behind the scenes, panic was spreading. The Soviets had noticed unusual activity near their ship and made a formal protest. Furious over the breach of trust, they accused the British of spying, an allegation that wasn't far from the truth. At home, the Prime Minister at the time, Anthony Eden, was reportedly enraged, not just at the incident, but at the fact that MI6 had apparently undertaken the mission without full governmental approval. A clampdown followed. Files were sealed. Officials were silenced. And Crabb's name was scrubbed from active records. But the story didn't end there. A year later, a body was found floating in Chichester Harbor, badly decomposed and missing its head and hands. The authorities, citing the condition of the remains, claimed it was impossible to confirm its identity. Yet Crabb's ex-wife and a close friend both insisted the body was his, identifying it by a distinctive scar and the style of his diving suit. The coroner, however, recorded an open verdict. So what really happened beneath the waves in Portsmouth that April morning? Several theories have emerged over the decades. The official assumption is that Crabb died during the mission, either from equipment failure, a medical episode, or miscalculation of the risks involved. He was 47 years old and, by most accounts, not in peak physical condition. Some reports suggest his diving gear was outdated. Others say he was pressured into accepting the mission by former intelligence colleagues eager to gain one last advantage against the Soviets. But then, the more provocative possibilities begin to surface. Some believe Crabb was caught in the act, discovered by Soviet divers or sonar operators, and either killed on the spot or captured alive. The Soviets, for their part, claimed they had nothing to do with his disappearance. But decades later, a former Soviet naval officer claimed that Crabb had been spotted, neutralized, and his body disposed of in a classified operation. If true, it would explain the missing body parts, the hands and face being the only reliable means of identification at the time. But again, no hard evidence has ever surfaced to confirm this version. Others speculate that Crabb didn't die at all. Could he have defected? Though far-fetched, some believe Crabb may have been turned, either during the mission or sometime earlier, and staged his own disappearance. Supporters of this theory point to Soviet reports from the late 1950s and 1960s suggesting a Western defector had been assisting with naval research in the USSR. But no name was ever given, and Crabb, if he had lived, never re-emerged. More cryptic are the claims that MI6 itself silenced Crabb, not because he failed, but because he succeeded in gathering classified intelligence that some in government wanted buried. Perhaps he discovered something unexpected, something not meant for public or political scrutiny. This theory, too, lacks concrete evidence, but persists in the absence of definitive answers. To this day, the British government has refused to fully declassify its files on the case. In 2016, an appeal to release the documents under the 30-year rule was denied. The files are now scheduled to remain sealed until at least 2057, more than a century after Crabb vanished. Why the continued secrecy? What is there to protect, long after the Cold War ended and most of the participants have passed on? Was Lionel Crabb simply a loyal officer caught in a risky operation gone wrong? Or was his disappearance part of something far more complex, an operation layered in deception, buried beneath the official record? And as the years pass, and those who remember fade into silence, one question continues to echo beneath the waves. What really happened to Commander Crabb? Deep in the Bavarian Alps, where fog drapes the pine-covered slopes like a veil of secrecy, there stands a forgotten manor. Its windows are long shattered, its doors choked with ivy and time. But whispers echo through its corridors, of seances, of symbols etched into stone, of clandestine gatherings that blurred the lines between science and sorcery. To some, it was nothing more than a place of eccentric rituals. To others, it was the hidden birthplace of one of the strangest and most unsettling enigmas of the Second World War, the Vril Society. In the grim and mystic corners of Nazi-era Germany, amid its thirst for domination and its obsession with racial mythology, there existed a lesser-known current of belief, one that reached beyond politics and into the metaphysical. And at the center of this belief was Vril, a substance, or a force, that was said to originate from deep within the earth, or perhaps from somewhere far beyond it. The story begins not in Germany, but in Victorian England. In 1871, British author Edward Bulwer Lytton, best known for coining the phrase, "It was a dark and stormy night," published a curious novel titled The Coming Race. In it, a narrator stumbles upon an advanced subterranean civilization that draws power from a mysterious energy called Vril. The inhabitants, the Vril Ya, are telepathic, highly evolved, and technologically superior. They live in harmony, but with the ability to destroy entire cities should they choose to. Bulwer Lytton's work was fiction, but for some, it offered more than just entertainment. Occult circles in early 20th century Europe began treating the coming race as disguised truth, an allegory for a hidden source of energy and power waiting to be rediscovered. By the 1920s, as Germany reeled from defeat in World War I and teetered under political chaos, esoteric groups flourished. The Vril Society, known for its nationalist and occult leanings, gained influence in the early Nazi movement. But deeper still was a group that left fewer records and far more questions: the Vril Society. The Vril Society, sometimes referred to as the Society for Truth, was rumored to be composed of intellectuals, mystics, and former members of the Thule Circle. According to speculative sources, their central belief was that Vril was not just an idea, but a real manipulable force. They sought to contact entities from other worlds or dimensions, claiming these beings had once interacted with ancient civilizations such as Atlantis and Babylon. Some even believed that the Vril Society engaged in psychic communication with alien intelligences, either from beneath the earth or from beyond the stars. Drawings found later, attributed to supposed members, depicted intricate flying disc designs, eerily similar to later concepts of UFOs. Were these blueprints inspired by fantasy, or by something they believed was given to them? One of the most persistent legends involves a medium named Maria Orsic. Described in post-war accounts as a striking woman with floor-length hair and piercing eyes, Orsic allegedly led a group of female psychics who received telepathic transmissions in an unknown script. These messages were supposedly translated into German and said to contain engineering plans for anti-gravity propulsion and advanced flying craft. Could these women have been channeling visions from a distant civilization, or simply engaging in imaginative trance states fueled by myth and longing? Here the narrative begins to blend with the known history of the Third Reich. We know the Nazi regime, particularly Heinrich Himmler and elements within the SS, were fascinated by ancient symbols, arcane rituals, and the notion of tapping into hidden energies. The Ahnenerbe, an SS-sponsored research institute, conducted expeditions to Tibet, the Arctic, and the Middle East in search of lost wisdom and proof of Aryan superiority. Their mission was not just archaeological, it was spiritual, ideological, and at times uncomfortably occult. Some researchers suggest that ideas from the Vril Society may have influenced certain segments of Nazi ideology, particularly the dream of creating a master race, powered by more than just biology, by unseen forces of will and spirit. A few fringe theorists go further, linking the Vril legends to supposed Nazi experiments in exotic propulsion, buried bases, and secret weapons that defy conventional physics. There are scattered wartime documents that reference disc prototypes, one known as the Honebu, another called the Vril 7, described in unreliable sources as flying machines powered by implosion engines or magnetic vortexes. Mainstream historians generally dismiss these claims as exaggerations or post-war disinformation, but the images, often grainy and stylized, continue to circulate. Was it disinformation or misdirection for something more secret? After the war, the trail goes cold, but not completely. In the chaos of 1945, many Nazi scientists and engineers were absorbed into Allied programs through initiatives like Operation Paperclip. Among them were propulsion experts and theorists whose work remains classified. Were any of these individuals influenced by the occult ideas floating through the darker chambers of wartime Germany? And what of Maria Orsic and the so-called Vril mediums? Some believe Orsic disappeared in the final days of the war, her name unrecorded among the dead or missing. A few post-war conspiracy theorists claim she escaped, perhaps to South America, perhaps somewhere less earthly, but no verifiable trace of her existence remains. Was she an invention? A post-war myth layered onto real fears of lost Nazi secrets? Or was she one of the many people, known and unknown, who were drawn into the seductive gravity of an idea? That ancient knowledge, lost technologies, and spiritual power could be harnessed to shape the fate of the modern world. Today, the name Vril exists on the fringes of historical study, dismissed by many, obsessed over by others. Files remain sealed, and the few that have surfaced only deepen the ambiguity. What is fact, and what is fantasy? What was truly pursued in the secrecy of the SS, and what was projected onto the post-war canvas of imagination? Was the Vril Society merely a myth? An occult footnote in the shadow of totalitarianism? Or could it represent something more? A door barely cracked open, revealing a deeper and more unsettling truth about the war, about power, and about the unseen forces that shape history. And if such forces were once sought, are they still? In the heart of wartime Berlin, amid the thundering jackboots and waving swastikas, the most dangerous secret of all was silence. The kind that lurked behind closed curtains, in rooms where the radios were turned down and the typewriters clacked only in the dark. Somewhere beneath the celebratory surface of the Third Reich, music was playing, a different kind. An orchestra not of brass or strings, but of signals and secrets. Its notes were telegrams, its score encrypted code, and its name, whispered in fear by the Gestapo, was the Rote Kapelle, the Red Orchestra. It wasn't a single group, nor a unified command. It was a tangle of loosely connected cells, stretching from Brussels to Berlin, Paris to Prague. At its center were people, ordinary and extraordinary, united not by uniform or nationality, but by an idea, that truth must be told, even in the face of death. But who were they really? And how did they manage to penetrate the very core of Nazi Europe? The name Red Orchestra was coined by the German Abwehr and Gestapo. In their internal reports, pianists were radio operators, conductors were cell leaders, and the entire web of Soviet-aligned espionage agents came to be known as an orchestra, a symphony of betrayal from the Nazi point of view. At its surface, the Red Orchestra was a Soviet spy network tasked with gathering intelligence on German troop movements, political developments, and technological advancements. Yet the truth is far more intricate. Take Leopold Trepper, for example, the figure many historians regard as the central conductor. A Polish Jew and committed communist, Trepper used his cover as a businessman dealing in pharmaceutical supplies to move through Nazi-occupied Europe with alarming ease. He operated out of Brussels and Paris, using front companies and black market connections to mask a vast web of agents. Some were ideologically aligned. Others were motivated by moral outrage or even survival. Then there was Harro Schulze-Boysen, a German aristocrat working within the Luftwaffe. By day, a rising star in the Nazi bureaucracy. By night, a secret resistor leaking high-level information to the Soviets. His wife, Libertas, also played a crucial role. Their apartment became a hub for intellectual dissent and clandestine activity. They passed along details of Nazi atrocities, military logistics, and eventually early signs of Hitler's plans to invade the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa. But was Stalin listening? One of the enduring tragedies of the Red Orchestra is the silence from Moscow in response to their reports. Multiple sources now confirm that Stalin repeatedly ignored or dismissed warnings from his spies, insisting that Hitler would not break the non-aggression pact. Was it disbelief or deliberate denial? And if the Soviets had heeded the Red Orchestra's reports, could the devastating first months of Operation Barbarossa have unfolded differently? The Red Orchestra was not just one operation, it was many. Multiple cells operated independently, yet seemed uncannily coordinated. Messages were sent via secret couriers, microdots, and radio transmissions cloaked in complex cipher patterns. The level of sophistication rivaled anything used by Allied intelligence services at the time. But such daring came with a price. By late 1942, the Gestapo began closing in. The Reich's radio detection units had grown increasingly effective. One by one, safe houses were compromised. Arrests swept across Germany, Belgium, and France. Torture, imprisonment, and executions followed. Entire families vanished behind the walls of Sachsenhausen and Plötzensee. Harro and Libertas Schulze-Boysen were among the captured. They were tried and executed, hanged in December 1942. Their legacy buried by both Nazi propaganda and, strangely, post-war indifference. Because after the war, another layer of mystery emerged. The Allies, while aware of some Red Orchestra activity, never fully grasped the scale. Soviet authorities, rather than honoring their fallen spies, often treated surviving members with suspicion. Some were imprisoned, interrogated, or executed, victims of Stalin's deep paranoia about disloyalty. Even Leopold Trepper, the master organizer, was arrested upon returning to Moscow. Why? Had the Red Orchestra become too independent, too autonomous? Or was the very idea of a successful intelligence network outside the Kremlin's direct control considered a threat? And then there are the unsolved questions. Some suggest the Red Orchestra may have been more than just a Soviet asset. French resistance fighters, anti-fascist Germans, and even disillusioned Nazi officers may have contributed intelligence, using the network's channels to leak information the Soviets didn't always know how to interpret. Did some members of the orchestra send false information, either knowingly or under duress? Were Allied operations ever compromised because of bad intelligence passed through these lines? The lack of unified records leaves us with speculation. Much of what we know comes from pieced-together documents, testimonies decades later, and files that remain, purposefully or conveniently, lost. And what of the legacy? Today, small plaques mark where Schulze-Boysen and others lived and died, but their story is rarely told in full. The Cold War cast a long shadow, reframing heroism through an ideological lens. In the West, Soviet spies were viewed with suspicion. In the East, independence was a liability. The orchestra's truth was caught between the crossfire of history. Was the Red Orchestra merely a network of loyal agents dutifully serving Moscow? Or was it something more elusive, a spontaneous symphony of resistance that transcended national allegiances. And how many names were never recorded? How many acts of quiet bravery passed unseen, their impact known only in fading fragments and whispered memories? Even now, as new documents surface and testimonies reemerge, the full scope of the Red Orchestra remains unclear. Were they warning bells ignored, or players in a much larger game of disinformation and sacrifice? And perhaps most haunting of all, what would they have revealed if we had only listened in time? The air hangs heavy over the Shropshire Hills in winter, cold, damp, and eerily quiet. Mist curls low over the grasslands, and the twisted branches of ancient oaks cast long shadows across the frozen soil. Amid this stillness sits Honington Hall, a stately Elizabethan manor with a long and dignified history. But on a bleak December night in 1944, that silence was shattered by a gunshot. It was here, within the peaceful folds of the English countryside, far from the front lines of World War II, that Sir Eric Teichman, an esteemed diplomat, explorer, and advisor to the Foreign Office, was found dead, shot at close range. The circumstances were strange, the explanations even stranger, and to this day, the incident remains one of the war's least understood and most quietly unsettling deaths. Eric Teichman was no ordinary civil servant. A seasoned traveler and fluent Mandarin speaker, he had spent decades in Central Asia and China, navigating delicate political currents and forging key diplomatic relationships in a region perpetually balanced between empires. In the early 20th century, he journeyed deep into the mountains of Xinjiang, often alone or with minimal escort, mapping uncharted territory and reporting firsthand on Soviet movements, tribal allegiances, and rising Chinese nationalism. By the 1930s, Teichman was considered a preeminent expert on Asia. His knowledge of remote geopolitical theaters made him invaluable to the British Foreign Office, especially as war clouds gathered once again over Europe and Asia. Though officially semi-retired by the outbreak of WW2, Teichman continued to work behind the scenes, advising officials on Chinese affairs and Soviet strategies. But in December 1944, Teichman was not in China nor in London. He was home, at his ancestral estate in Honington, recovering from illness, living quietly, or so it seemed. And then, something went terribly wrong. On the night of December 3rd, Sir Eric reportedly heard unfamiliar noises on his estate. Footsteps, the subtle rattle of movement where none should be. Armed with a flashlight, he stepped outside to investigate. Minutes later, he was shot in the back of the head with a service revolver. He died almost instantly. His body was discovered not far from his front door. The nation was stunned. Who would murder a British diplomat on British soil during wartime? The answer, according to the official investigation, came quickly. 2 American soldiers, Private George Smith and Private Leonard S. Wichpacha, had gone absent without leave from their nearby base. In violation of orders, they were armed and roaming the countryside. The story went that they were attempting to steal a car to aid their desertion. When confronted by Teichman, Smith panicked and fired. He was arrested days later, court-martialed, found guilty of murder. And in May 1945, he became the last American soldier executed by the U.S. military in Britain. Case closed. Or was it? At first glance, the facts seemed to fit a tragic but plausible scenario. 2 desperate soldiers, fearing punishment, acting rashly when challenged. Yet those who knew Teichman, and those who have examined the details since, raise unsettling questions. Why was Teichman's death so swiftly explained and quietly buried? For such a high-ranking figure, why were there no public statements from the Foreign Office, no formal inquiry, no lasting media coverage beyond the immediate reporting? And what exactly was Teichman doing in the weeks leading up to his death? Though officially at home on leave, some sources suggest he was still engaged in sensitive intelligence work. In late 1944, tensions were rising between the Allies and the Soviets, particularly over influence in Eastern Europe and post-war Asia. Teichman, with his deep knowledge of Chinese and Soviet relations, would have been uniquely placed to understand and potentially influence such discussions. Was it possible that his death was more than a coincidence? A few researchers have speculated, quietly, cautiously, that Teichman may have stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to see. Could his presence at Honington Hall have intersected, by accident or design, with clandestine military activity? Was he monitoring communications? Or had he perhaps become inconvenient to one of the shifting post-war agendas taking form as Germany's defeat became inevitable? One strange detail that rarely makes the official histories: the revolver used to kill Teichman was a U.S. military-issue sidearm. Why would an ordinary soldier on the run carry such a weapon in full violation of protocol, unless he had been on a sanctioned mission of some kind? There are also reports, never confirmed, that Teichman had been in recent contact with Chinese nationalist representatives and may have expressed skepticism about Soviet influence in post-war Asia. Would such views have made him a target, or merely a voice worth silencing? And then there's the curious fact that after the execution of George Smith, all files relating to the incident were quietly sealed. Even today, there remain gaps in the timeline, missing interviews, and redacted testimonies. The story of Eric Teichman resists neat categorization. It is not the tale of a battlefield hero. It is not a spy novel with a clear villain. Instead, it occupies that liminal space between diplomacy and secrecy, between accident and intention. Some believe it was simply a terrible mistake, a good man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Others suspect deeper motives, hinting at Cold War tensions already surfacing before the guns of World War II had even gone silent. Was Eric Teichman killed by chance or by design? And in a war defined by shadows and secrets, how many more stories like his have slipped quietly through the cracks of history, forgotten, but never truly resolved? What else lies buried in the stillness of Shropshire beneath the frost-covered fields and silence of winter? From the edge of the Wiltshire Plains, where rolling green fields meet a horizon dotted with low fences and surveillance cameras, there rises a complex that appears at first glance to be little more than a secure government facility. Rows of low-slung buildings, quiet roads, grassy bunkers. Unremarkable, unassuming. And yet, behind its carefully guarded perimeter lies one of the most secretive scientific installations in British history. Its name is Porton Down. It began in 1916 as a response to a horrifying new reality: the deployment of poison gas during World War I. As clouds of chlorine and mustard gas swept across battlefields in Europe, Britain scrambled to understand, contain, and eventually retaliate with chemical warfare of its own. Porton Down became the heart of that effort, and it would remain so through World War II and far beyond. But by the 1940s, the science taking place within its sealed laboratories and underground chambers had evolved into something far stranger and far more elusive. During the Second World War, the British government, like its enemies and allies alike, grew increasingly preoccupied with the invisible weapons of the future. Nerve agents, biological pathogens, experimental chemicals that could incapacitate or kill without a single shot being fired. As traditional warfare dragged on, attention turned toward silent tools, substances that could turn the tide without leaving a trace. It was here, amid the wind-swept Salisbury countryside, that a series of secret experiments took place, tests that for decades were kept hidden from public knowledge. The official records, declassified only in fragments, reveal controlled studies on mustard gas exposure, the effects of nerve agents like sarin, and the behavior of infectious biological agents under wartime conditions. Some of the work was defensive, focused on creating effective gas masks, decontamination procedures, and antidotes. But other efforts ventured into more morally ambiguous territory. Volunteers were recruited, primarily young servicemen, often without full knowledge of the tests they were about to undergo. In one such case, Airman Ronald Madison, just 20 years old, took part in what he believed was a routine experiment in 1953, decades after the war, but part of a continuous line of research dating back to the 1940s. He was administered drops of sarin nerve agent directly onto his skin. He died within hours. His family would not learn the full truth until nearly 50 years later, if that occurred during peacetime. What might have happened when the world was at war? The most direct connection to World War II came in the form of Operation Vegetarian, a chilling plan, now verified, to attack German cattle stocks with anthrax-laced linseed cakes. The idea was simple but devastating. Introduce deadly spores into the food chain, causing widespread starvation and panic. Tests were conducted off the coast of Scotland on Gruinard Island, which remained uninhabitable for decades. But that was just what we know. Multiple witnesses and former staff have suggested that testing at Porton Down during the war may have extended further into fields of behavior-altering chemicals, psychoactive agents, and chemical means of interrogation or psychological control. Were they exploring not just how to kill, but how to manipulate thought itself? Rumors persist of tests involving LSD and BZ agents, decades before such substances were associated with Cold War mind control experiments like the CIA's MK-Ultra. Did the roots of those programs begin in Britain, under the cover of wartime urgency? And then there is the question of foreign knowledge exchange. As the war ended, Operation Paperclip in the United States brought captured German scientists, many with experience in chemical and biological warfare, to work for Western powers. Britain, too, acquired intelligence and expertise. Some accounts suggest that elements of Nazi research, particularly from the SS's own chemical divisions, were quietly integrated into Porton Down's ongoing work. If so, what ethical lines were crossed? What data was considered too useful to ignore, despite its dark origins? There's also the matter of what was tested, and where. Documents uncovered in recent years point to open-air testing of chemical agents on unsuspecting populations, both in the UK and abroad. Zinc-cadmium sulfide, used as a tracer for more dangerous particles, was sprayed over large areas, including parts of Norfolk and London, to study dispersion patterns. While officially deemed safe, these tests were not disclosed to the public at the time. In other cases, ships off the British coast were used as platforms for dispersing bacteria or gas simulants designed to mimic real chemical attacks. But how much of this had its origin in wartime necessity? Were these simply continuations of programs begun during World War II? Programs designed to develop weapons that, thankfully, were never used? Or were they something more? In some classified circles, speculation swirls around an even stranger possibility that Porton Down explored not just chemical weaponry, but biological anomalies. Files from the 1940s reference unusual strains of bacteria and viruses that seem to have no known natural origin. Could these have been early attempts to manipulate DNA or even to create synthetic pathogens? It seems unlikely, but the veil of secrecy makes it difficult to rule anything out entirely, and to this day, large portions of Porton Down's archives remain restricted. Even the full extent of its World War II-era operations has not been released. Is it because of national security? Or because the past, once revealed, might raise uncomfortable questions about ethics, transparency, and the long-term health effects on those exposed, often unknowingly, to the government's most secret trials? What exactly was happening behind those barbed wire fences during Britain's darkest hour? Were the scientists of Porton Down truly defending the nation, or were they reaching for a kind of power no one fully understood? And as we examine what little has been revealed, what still remains locked away, deep in the archives or buried beneath the fields of Wiltshire, could the full truth of Porton Down's wartime experiments ever be known? Or is it destined to remain one of the many quiet enigmas of the Second World War, hidden in plain sight, preserved in silence? In a quiet, snow-blanketed suburb just outside Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, an unassuming Soviet research institute once stood half-buried beneath the winter fog. From the outside, it resembled a typical government complex. Concrete walls, narrow windows, the dull gray of bureaucracy. But inside, according to declassified fragments and whispered testimony, something stranger may have been unfolding. Not weapons of steel or fire, but of thought. The Soviet mind, sharpened for war. In a time when bullets and bombs seemed insufficient to contain the chaos of global conflict, some in the upper echelons of Soviet command looked elsewhere, beyond physics, beyond chemistry, even beyond biology, toward the invisible, the intangible, the unexplained. Could the human mind itself become a battlefield? While tales of psychic warfare are most often associated with Cold War rivalries and American projects like Stargate or MK Ultra, the origins of this strange arms race may reach back further, into the crucible of World War II. And it was in the Soviet Union, long known for its obsessive pursuit of strategic parity, that interest in psychic phenomena quietly bloomed during the 1930s and 40s. Officially, the Soviet state dismissed spiritualism and paranormal belief as unscientific. Yet behind closed doors, military and scientific elites were funding unusual studies, investigating telepathy, remote viewing, psychokinesis, and the ability to influence biological systems at a distance. The term they often used was bioenergetics. Was this legitimate scientific inquiry, or the wartime fever dream of a state under siege? According to reports uncovered after the fall of the Soviet Union, one of the earliest efforts began in earnest during the late 1930s, when the NKVD, predecessor to the KGB, sponsored research into what it called psychotronics. Using subjects drawn from across the vast Soviet Union, researchers claimed to observe anomalous brain activity, unexplained electrical emissions from human skin, and episodes of long-distance perception. As the Nazi invasion of 1941 tore into the Soviet heartland, some believe these experiments were accelerated. Rumors spread, never officially confirmed, that certain units received training in intuition enhancement, rapid pattern recognition, and even subconscious communication across long distances. Could elite Soviet scouts really locate enemy positions without maps? Could prisoners be coerced not through torture, but suggestion? One project allegedly centered on nonverbal interrogation. According to fragmentary testimony from a former Red Army intelligence officer, the technique involved placing a captured enemy officer in proximity to a Soviet sensitive, a person believed to possess heightened mental receptivity. The sensitive would then attempt to receive facts the prisoner refused to speak aloud. This wasn't science fiction, the officer insisted. It was classified military protocol. None of this was documented in official wartime communiques, and perhaps it was never meant to be. There were also whispers of experiments tied to the mysterious figure of Nina Kulagina, a Russian woman who, decades later, would stun researchers with apparent psychokinetic abilities, moving small objects without physical contact. Though her fame peaked in the 1960s, some now speculate that she, and others like her, were identified and quietly studied years earlier, during the height of the war. Did wartime authorities believe that such individuals could one day influence the thoughts of enemy leaders, or disable equipment from a distance? Even Joseph Stalin was said to have taken an interest in invisible warfare, consulting fringe theorists while publicly condemning them. One alleged Soviet file, cited by Cold War defectors, describes an internal memo about remote destabilization techniques, the idea that a sufficiently trained mind could induce confusion, fear, or sleep in a distant subject. The targets: enemy pilots, political leaders, double agents. Were these mere fantasies, the hopeful delusions of a government desperate to gain an upper hand? Or were they the first steps into a hidden domain of human potential? Strangely, the Allies may have taken notice. British intelligence files from the wartime period include curious references to unconventional psychological research taking place in Soviet territories. In one 1944 communication, a British official stationed in Moscow relayed second-hand accounts of Soviet mental conditioning trials involving isolated subjects in underground bunkers. No further details were given. No confirmation followed. Even American wartime archives contain brief but suggestive references. A 1945 intelligence summary, now declassified, warned of Soviet interest in extrasensory phenomena for potential battlefield use. Whether this was based on credible observation or intercepted rumors remains unclear. After the war, as the Cold War began to chill global relations, the threads picked up again, this time more openly. The Soviets launched extensive programs in parapsychology throughout the 1950s and 60s, pouring millions into research institutes in Moscow and Leningrad. But many believe these Cold War efforts were not beginnings, but continuations, evolutions of secret wartime work buried beneath layers of official denial. And today, much of what was developed during the 1940s has never been fully disclosed. Archives remain sealed. Researchers vanish from records. Projects are referenced, but never fully explained. Even in post-Soviet Russia, former intelligence officers speak of the psychic programs only in vague elliptical terms: training in perception, non-traditional communication, energetic influence. So what, if anything, really happened behind the closed doors of Soviet psychic warfare? Did Stalin's scientists unlock hidden potential in the human mind? Or were they chasing shadows, mistaking coincidence for revelation? And if even a fraction of their findings proved viable, might they have changed the shape of global conflict, not through force of arms, but force of will? How much of the mind remains uncharted territory, capable, perhaps, of feats we still hesitate to imagine? And how many wartime truths, buried beneath layers of ideology and secrecy, still wait, silent and invisible, just beyond the reach of our understanding? Beneath the turquoise depths of the Strait of Malacca, where the waters shimmer with heat and ancient trade routes weave between distant shores, rests a long-forgotten grave. Twisted steel, encrusted with coral, lies silent beneath the waves. At first glance, it resembles any other wartime wreck, but this is no ordinary relic. This is what remains of U-859, a German-type D2 submarine sunk in September 1944. And the secrets it carried may never have fully surfaced. In the final years of the Second World War, as the Allies tightened their grip around Nazi Germany, the Kriegsmarine launched increasingly desperate and ambitious missions. Some of these involved the long-range Type 9 submarines, designed to travel vast distances and carry strategic materials to and from Axis-aligned territories. U-859 was one of these silent runners, armed, armored, and burdened with more than just weapons. Its destination was Japan. But its cargo, and what happened along its journey, remains a source of quiet fascination and enduring mystery. U-859 departed from Kiel, Germany, in April 1944, under the command of Kapitänleutnant Johann Jebsen. Its destination, Penang, on the western coast of occupied Malaya, then a key hub for Axis naval coordination in the Far East. The voyage would be long and treacherous, involving a route around the Cape of Good Hope, avoiding Allied convoys and hunter-killer groups across 2 oceans. But the submarine was no ordinary supply vessel. According to declassified documents and the later testimony of surviving crew, U-859 was carrying a highly unusual cargo, approximately 33 tons of mercury, sealed in flasks and stored deep within the hull. Officially, the mercury was destined for Japanese weapons laboratories, allegedly for use in manufacturing detonators and other explosive components. But to some observers, the quantity seemed excessive, far more than what was required for conventional arms. Could this mercury have had another purpose? It was not the only submarine ferrying secret cargo between Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. This route, sometimes referred to as the Yanagi missions, formed a crucial and shadowy exchange corridor late in the war. Materials, intelligence, and technology were traded between the 2 powers via these undersea couriers. Some U-boats carried blueprints for advanced aircraft. Others reportedly transported uranium compounds. Could U-859's cargo have included early nuclear materials, hidden among the mercury flasks? There are no records to confirm such speculation. But the mere possibility casts a long shadow over the submarine's final voyage. After months at sea, and despite disease breaking out among the crew in tropical waters, U-859 approached its destination in early September. It was within 20 nautical miles of Penang when fate, or something more deliberate, struck. On September 23, 1944, as U-859 prepared to surface in the Strait of Malacca, it was intercepted by the British Royal Navy submarine HMS Trenchant. A single torpedo struck the German boat, splitting the hull and sending it to the bottom. Out of 67 crew members, only 20 survived. They were later captured by British forces and interrogated. Yet curiously, many aspects of the mission were left out of official reports. No mention was made of specific instructions from Berlin. No cargo manifest was made public. And most notably, there was little discussion of the mercury. Why? In 1972, nearly 3 decades after the war, divers discovered the wreck of U-859. The submarine was relatively intact, lying in about 50 meters of water off the Malaysian coast. Local salvagers, at first unaware of what they had found, eventually retrieved some of the mercury flasks. These hazardous materials were stored in steel containers, still sealed, and reportedly sold to buyers across Asia. But reports soon emerged of sickness and environmental contamination from the recovered mercury. The Malaysian government attempted to halt the salvage, citing the toxicity and potential for disaster. Yet much of the cargo had already vanished into private hands. And with it, perhaps, the last physical evidence of what U-859 truly carried. In the years since, historians and amateur researchers alike have speculated on the true purpose of the voyage. Was U-859 merely a delivery system for explosives components, or was it part of a more elaborate exchange of wartime technology? Japan's own nuclear ambitions, though far behind those of the US or Germany, were real. The FGO project, based in Korea and Manchuria, attempted to enrich uranium late in the war. Could U-859 have been part of a broader effort to supply Japan with the resources to accelerate this program? And why did British authorities, who had the surviving crew and the ability to inspect the wreck in detail, remain largely silent on the matter? Perhaps the mercury was all there was. Or perhaps the mystery lies not only in what the submarine carried, but in what it might have meant had it arrived intact. There's also a stranger thread, a whisper that refuses to fade. According to an obscure British naval report, intercepted radio signals from U-859 in early September 1944 suggested a deviation from its original route. Some believe it made an unscheduled stop along the African coast. Why? No explanation was ever provided. Theories range from a covert refueling to the offloading of select cargo, possibly into the hands of sympathizers or collaborators. Was something removed from U-859 before it sank? Or was it never meant to reach Penang at all? As the salt water slowly corrodes what remains of the hull, the mystery of U-859 endures, entombed in darkness and time. Its voyage was real, its cargo deadly, but the purpose behind it remains tantalizingly unclear. What was so important that Nazi Germany would risk an entire submarine crew to send it across half the world so late in the war? What else might have gone down with U-859? And what, if anything, was deliberately left behind? And in the still, murky waters of the Strait of Malacca, how many more secrets lie undiscovered, waiting to be stirred from the ocean floor? Along the desolate northern coastline of Germany, where the icy waters of the Baltic Sea touch the pale sands of Usedom Island, stands a place both forgotten and monumental. In the early morning mist, the battered ruins of concrete bunkers and rusted rail lines peek from the forest like the bones of some great mechanical beast. This is Peenemünde, once the epicenter of Nazi Germany's most advanced and enigmatic military research. A place where the future was forged in fire and cloaked in silence. It was here, amid pine forests and hidden airstrips, that the V-2 rocket was born, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. Designed by Werner von Braun and a cadre of German engineers, the V-2 was a marvel of deadly ingenuity, capable of reaching the edge of space before crashing back to Earth with supersonic speed. It redefined the meaning of war, striking London and Antwerp with no warning, no defense. But the story of Peenemünde is not limited to what we know. For beyond the publicized rocketry successes and wartime terror lies a deeper, darker undercurrent, a series of experiments, ambitions, and disappearances that even now remain buried beneath decades of secrecy. Construction on the Peenemünde Army Research Center began in the early 1930s. From the outset, it was intended to be more than just a testing site. It was a fortress of innovation, a self-contained city of science. Laboratories, barracks, factories, and launch pads covered over 25 square kilometers. With its own port and rail links, Peenemünde operated as a state within a state, largely shielded from outside scrutiny. During the war, it became home to more than 12,000 workers, including engineers, technicians, and thousands of forced laborers. It was here that the V-1 flying bomb was tested, the V-2 developed, and other weapons, some documented, others rumored, quietly explored. Allied intelligence, aware of its significance, dubbed it Target Number 1. In 1943, the British launched Operation Hydra, a massive air raid aimed at crippling the facility. Though the attack caused significant damage and killed key personnel, the program was not destroyed. Instead, it was pushed further underground, literally and figuratively. What followed were years of whispered activity. Rocket tests continued, but records suggest a shift in priorities. Something else may have been under development. According to fragmentary post-war intelligence and declassified OSS reports, Peenemünde housed more than rocket engineers. Physicists, chemists, even medical researchers were brought in under special clearance. Some sources hint at early nuclear research, though Germany's nuclear program was widely believed to be disorganized and underfunded. Yet uranium compounds were known to be in transit within the Reich, and some believe components were tested not in Berlin or Leipzig, but in isolated sites like Peenemünde. Was the facility part of an unacknowledged nuclear initiative? No definitive proof exists, but the questions persist. There were also rumors of sonic weapons, devices that could incapacitate or kill using focused sound. British interrogation reports mention captured German scientists referencing acoustic fields tested in forest clearings near the Peenemünde complex. The details remain vague, the science unclear. Still, it is striking how often such stories reappear in intelligence archives, not just dismissed as fantasy, but marked further investigation required. Then there are the more speculative fringe threads, curious but persistent. Some researchers argue that Peenemunde's advanced understanding of propulsion and guidance systems suggested knowledge well ahead of its time. They point to the sudden leap in rocket sophistication between 1941 and 1944 to design documents that seemingly anticipated post-war aerospace technologies decades early. Was there outside influence? Reverse engineering of unknown materials? While such ideas often veer into pseudoscience, the presence of secrecy, missing records, and vanished scientists lends these speculations an enduring, if uneasy, life. A more grounded mystery surrounds the fate of the site's most sensitive research. As the Red Army advanced in 1945, Peenemünde was evacuated. Von Braun and many top engineers surrendered to American forces in the West, becoming the backbone of NASA's future programs. But not all records were recovered. Not all scientists were accounted for. Soviet forces arrived weeks later and began their own investigation, seizing equipment, documents, and personnel. What they found, or didn't, was never fully disclosed. Later, Soviet rocket developments would echo Peenemünde designs. But some researchers suspect there was more. Hidden technologies, half-completed experiments, or prototypes that disappeared into the vaults of the NKVD. Today, the remains of the Peenemünde facility are open to the public. A museum tells the official story of rockets and resistance, innovation and tragedy. Yet vast sections remain off-limits, fenced and overgrown. Parts of the underground tunnels collapsed long ago. Others are still sealed. Occasionally, amateur explorers report finding rooms with scorched walls, strange inscriptions, or machines whose function cannot be easily determined. These stories are hard to verify. Some may be embellished, but they reflect the enduring fascination with what might still lie beneath the surface. What research was deemed too dangerous to continue? What knowledge was lost or hidden as the Third Reich fell? And, perhaps most unsettling, what if some of that research didn't vanish, but was quietly absorbed into other nations' programs, reborn under different flags? The silence surrounding Peenemünde is not accidental. After the war, both the United States and the Soviet Union competed fiercely for German expertise. Operation Paperclip in the US and its Soviet counterpart both scoured Nazi scientific programs for anything usable. In the process, ethical lines were blurred, war crimes overlooked, and some technologies shrouded in enduring ambiguity. Peenemünde, once a place of unrelenting noise, of engines roaring into the stratosphere and bombs falling from the sky, is now quiet. But beneath the calm, questions still echo. What else was being built, tested, or imagined in the isolated labs along the Baltic Sea? Were these simply weapons of war? Or something more transformative? Something not meant for 1945, but for a different kind of future? And in the vaults of old superpowers, behind doors marked Top Secret or Do Not Archive, might the full story of Peenemünde still wait, hidden in the shadows of history? In the final days of April 1945, as Soviet artillery rumbled across Berlin and the Third Reich teetered on the edge of collapse, the Führerbunker descended into an eerie silence. Beneath layers of concrete, deep in the heart of a dying regime, Adolf Hitler made what history records as his last decisions, issued his last orders, and then vanished from the world stage in a firestorm of conflicting accounts, hasty cremations, and broken loyalties. Above ground, Berlin was nothing more than rubble and smoke, but beneath it, in that tight labyrinth of gray corridors and dim rooms, a question would begin to smolder, one that still haunts the fringes of history. Was the man who died in the bunker really Adolf Hitler? Or could it have been someone else, someone made to look like him? For decades, mainstream historians have relied on the testimony of those present in the Führer bunker, as well as Soviet forensic reports, to construct the accepted narrative of Hitler's death: a gunshot, a cyanide capsule, and the hurried burning of his and Eva Braun's bodies in the Chancellery Garden. But the Soviets themselves were never entirely consistent in their findings. Stalin, notably, told Western leaders as late as 1945 that Hitler may have escaped. What could explain such hesitation? Some point to confusion amid the chaos. Others, however, raise a darker possibility: that what was found and burned was not the real Adolf Hitler, but a body double. The concept of political body doubles is not fiction. Throughout history, rulers and military leaders have employed decoys to confuse enemies and avoid assassination. British intelligence had their own Operation Mincemeat in 1943, a corpse planted with false documents to deceive the Nazis. Joseph Stalin reportedly used doubles for public appearances. Even Saddam Hussein's regime later became infamous for its use of impersonators. But did Adolf Hitler do the same? There is circumstantial evidence suggesting the possibility. Allied intelligence files from the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, mention rumors that the Nazi leadership had experimented with lookalikes. A captured SS officer reportedly told interrogators that body doubles were considered as part of Hitler's security strategy, especially after the failed July 20th plot in 1944. In fact, after the bomb attempt on Hitler's life at the Wolf's Lair, security around him became drastically more secretive. According to some accounts, a man named Gustav Weller, allegedly an actor, was employed as a decoy. Photographs exist showing a man bearing a striking resemblance to Hitler, used in newsreels and possibly in limited public appearances. But hard documentation is elusive. The Reich was collapsing, and so too were the paper trails. Could one of these men have died in Hitler's place? The Soviet autopsy reports offer more intrigue than clarity. When Red Army troops finally reached the Chancellery Garden, they found a partially charred corpse that they claimed was Hitler's. But early accounts of dental evidence were contradictory. Some Soviet documents claimed the body was too badly burned to identify. Others suggested positive identification through dental work. Yet the Soviets were inconsistent with their narrative, changing details in subsequent years and refusing to release the skull fragment they claimed belonged to Hitler. When that fragment was finally tested decades later, it was revealed to belong to a woman, raising yet more questions. Did the Soviets themselves doubt the identity of the man in the grave? More curious still is how many people in the post-war period believed or claimed that Hitler had escaped. From South America to the Middle East, sightings and rumors spread rapidly in the years following 1945. A particularly persistent claim involved Argentina, where a large German émigré population had settled. FBI files declassified in the 1990s show that American intelligence continued receiving and occasionally investigating reports of Hitler's survival well into the 1950s. Were these simply the products of post-war paranoia? Or were they fueled by something more, perhaps the quiet knowledge that doubles had been used and that not all appearances could be trusted? Some fringe researchers believe Hitler's body double died in the bunker, while the real dictator was spirited away through secret routes, possibly through the so-called rat lines organized by fleeing Nazis. These escape networks, some facilitated by sympathetic figures in the Vatican and elements of the Red Cross, were real. They allowed high-ranking war criminals like Adolf Eichmann and Josef Mengele to vanish for decades. Could Hitler have used the same means, hiding behind a mask of another man's corpse? Skeptics rightly point out the logistical difficulty. Hitler was physically and mentally deteriorating by April 1945, suffering from tremors and paranoia. Escaping undetected, especially from a bunker surrounded by Soviet troops, would have required flawless planning and absolute loyalty from every person involved. And yet, the Third Reich was nothing if not a regime built on control, illusion, and deception. Today, the site of the Führerbunker lies buried beneath a nondescript Berlin parking lot. No markers indicate what lies below. No official plaque records the last stand of the man who plunged the world into war. It is almost as if the city itself wishes to erase that final chapter. But questions remain, subtle, persistent, and uneasy. Did Adolf Hitler truly die in that subterranean room by his own hand? Or did the chaos of war allow for a final vanishing act, made possible by years of preparation and misdirection? Who was the man burned in the garden? Germany's most infamous dictator, or merely a convincing stand-in? And in the age of digital archives, declassified intelligence, and forensic re-examination, what other truths might still be buried, waiting for history to catch up with the shadows? August in Taipei is hot and heavy with the scent of tropical rain. The air clings to the skin. In 1945, the city was still under Japanese occupation, its narrow lanes threaded with soldiers and civilians alike, living in the uncertainty of a world at war's end. Among the winding alleys and airfields, on the 18th day of that month, a plane was said to have lifted off from the Matsuyama airfield, its engines roaring toward the southern horizon. Moments later, it would crash. The wreckage would smolder on the tarmac, and a man, wrapped in bandages, severely burned, would be taken to a nearby hospital. That man, according to official reports, was Subhas Chandra Bose, the firebrand Indian nationalist who had allied himself with Axis powers to fight British colonial rule. But for decades after that fateful day, one question would refuse to die. Did Netaji really perish in that crash? Or did he vanish into history's shadows, continuing his mission from places unknown? Subhas Chandra Bose was unlike any other figure in India's struggle for independence. Charismatic, radical, and willing to challenge orthodoxy at every turn, Bose rejected the nonviolent methods of Mahatma Gandhi. Instead, he sought independence through force, aligning with Japan and Nazi Germany during the Second World War to raise an army, the Indian National Army, INA, that could challenge the British Empire militarily. His choice was controversial, his vision uncompromising. By 1945, as the Axis powers collapsed, Bose found himself cornered. Japan was preparing to surrender. The INA had been routed, and Bose, ever elusive, was on the move again, reportedly trying to reach the Soviet Union via Manchuria, possibly to secure new political asylum or support for his continued anti-colonial campaign. That's when the story becomes murky. According to the Japanese government, Bose boarded a Mitsubishi Kai-21 bomber from Saigon, stopping over in Taipei. There, on August 18, 1945, the aircraft took off for Daren, now Dalian in China, but reportedly crashed shortly after takeoff. Japanese accounts claim Bose suffered third-degree burns and died in a local military hospital later that evening. His body, they said, was cremated. His ashes were eventually interred at the Renkoji Temple in Tokyo, where they remain to this day. But there were problems with the story. No photographs of the burned body, no clear chain of custody for the ashes. And witnesses, those who had seen Bose hours or even minutes before, gave inconsistent statements, some of which were contradictory or retracted in later years. The first seeds of doubt were planted early. British and Indian intelligence services, which had long monitored Bose, were skeptical. In fact, British officials in New Delhi openly expressed disbelief in his death. They feared, and perhaps anticipated, that Bose would resurface, stoking unrest in a country already boiling over with calls for independence. Newspapers around the world speculated. Political leaders in India questioned the account. Even those close to Bose admitted they had no first-hand confirmation of his death. Why were there no photographs? Why was the crash site never independently investigated? Why was no autopsy ever conducted? And perhaps most puzzling, why would a man as politically savvy and symbolically important as Subhas Chandra Bose choose to fly in a vulnerable, overloaded military transport in a region under Allied surveillance just days after Japan's surrender? In the decades that followed, 3 separate Indian commissions were established to investigate Bose's disappearance. 2 of them, the Shah Nawaz Committee, 1956, and the Justice G.D. Khosla Commission, 1970, largely accepted the plane crash narrative. But the third and most recent, the Justice Mukherjee Commission of Inquiry, submitted in 2006, came to a starkly different conclusion. There was no evidence of a plane crash in Taipei on August 18, 1945. The Mukherjee Commission's findings were based on multiple site visits, archival research, and interviews across Japan, Taiwan, and India. It concluded that the supposed crash was likely fabricated, and that Bose did not die in it. Yet, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Indian government rejected the Commission's findings, leaving the mystery unresolved. So if Bose did not die in Taipei, where did he go? Over the years, theories have abounded. One posits that Bose reached the Soviet Union, hoping to gain asylum or forge an alliance. Some declassified intelligence documents from the 1940s hint that Soviet authorities may have detained or even interrogated him. But Moscow never confirmed his presence, and no documentation has surfaced to conclusively place Bose within the USSR. Another theory, more enduring in popular imagination, claims that Bose returned to India in disguise, living as a mysterious ascetic monk known as Gumnami Baba in Uttar Pradesh. The monk's identity was fiercely guarded, his habits oddly consistent with Bose's known preferences, from his knowledge of multiple languages to his peculiar handwriting. After his death in 1985, the belongings of Gumnami Baba were examined, revealing letters, books, and artifacts linked to the INA and Bose himself. Yet DNA testing and handwriting analyses remain inconclusive. The truth, if there is one, remains shrouded in secrecy and conflicting evidence. The question of Subhas Chandra Bose's death is more than a historical footnote. For millions of Indians, he remains a symbol of defiance, sacrifice, and untamed political will. His vanishing in 1945 echoes eerily with other wartime disappearances, like those of Hitler's suspected doubles or the lost Nazi gold trains, stories where facts blur into folklore and truth recedes just beyond reach. Why was so little done to recover his remains? Why did so many key details remain inconsistent across time and testimony? And perhaps most haunting, was Subhas Chandra Bose silenced not by flame or steel but by design, folded into the fog of post-war politics, where his return would have proved too disruptive for a world seeking stability over justice? As long as Renkoji Temple holds ashes with a name but no confirmed body, as long as classified archives remain locked in London, Moscow, and New Delhi, the question lingers, unanswered, unyielding. What really happened to the man they called Netaji? And could the final chapter of India's revolutionary firebrand still lie unwritten, hidden among forgotten documents, unspoken agreements, or beneath the robes of a silent monk? The wind rolls gently across the Moravian hills, brushing over wild grasses and silent stones. There are no original houses here, no church bells, no bustling square, just empty land, soft trails, and a profound silence, so still it feels almost sacred. This is Lidice, located a short drive northwest of Prague. The land where the village once stood now serves as a memorial. But in June of 1942, Lidice was a living, breathing community. Farmers tended fields, children played in the meadows, and life followed the slow rhythm of the Czech countryside. Then, in a single night, that rhythm was shattered, obliterated not only by bullets and fire, but by something even colder: intent. The village wasn't caught in the crossfire of battle. Lidice was selected, chosen to be a message, a warning. But why Lidice? Why here? And what exactly was the message that the Nazis were trying to send? To understand the tragedy of Lidice, one must step into the shadow of a man whose very presence in Prague inspired both fear and rebellion. Reinhard Heydrich. Often called the Butcher of Prague, Heydrich was one of the highest-ranking officials in the Third Reich, chief architect of the final solution and deputy leader of the SS. In 1941, Hitler appointed him as acting Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, the modern-day Czech Republic. His rule was ruthless. Resistance was crushed. Thousands were arrested, tortured, and sent to concentration camps. And yet, his very presence seemed to galvanize the underground movements even further. On May 27, 1942, as Heydrich rode in an open-top Mercedes through the streets of Prague, two Czech resistance fighters, trained in Britain and parachuted into occupied territory, sprung their trap. A grenade exploded beside the car. Heydrich was injured. Days later, he died from sepsis. The response from Berlin was swift and unrelenting. The Nazis vowed revenge. Hitler himself, enraged by the assassination, demanded a lesson be taught to all would-be insurgents. Heinrich Himmler ordered reprisals so brutal they would scorch fear into the hearts of the entire population. But how does one avenge a single man's death? The answer, it seems, was to erase an entire village. On June 9, 1942, German forces surrounded the village of Lidice. The men, 173 in total, were taken to a nearby farm and executed in rows, their bodies dumped into mass graves. The women and children were separated. Most of the women were deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. The children? Some were selected for Germanization, forced adoption into Nazi families. The rest were sent to gas vans in Chełmno. By the end of that day, Lidice was gone. But the soldiers didn't stop there. They set fire to every building, demolished the ruins with explosives, and bulldozed the rubble into the earth. Even the dead were exhumed from the cemetery. The village was wiped from maps, from signs, from existence. Officially, Lidice no longer existed. But still the question lingers. Why Lidice? The Nazi explanation was chillingly bureaucratic. Lidice, they claimed, had harbored resistance fighters. A radio signal had allegedly originated from the village. A family named Horak, known for anti-German sentiments, lived there. That, according to Gestapo records, was enough to seal its fate. Yet when later investigations examined those claims, the links to Heydrich's assassins were tenuous at best. No conclusive evidence was ever found that Lidice's residents had played a direct role in the attack. The operation seemed less about retribution and more about spectacle, about making an example so unforgettable that no one would dare challenge the Reich again. But was there something more? Some researchers point to deeper motives. Reinhard Heydrich was not just a Nazi administrator. He was a key figure in Hitler's inner circle and a rising star, intelligent, ambitious, and terrifyingly efficient. His death struck at the heart of Nazi leadership. Could the destruction of Lidice have been as much about internal fear of appearing weak, as it was about external punishment? Others suggest the act had propaganda value. The Nazis filmed the razing of the village, creating footage that was later used internally to demonstrate the consequences of resistance. It was, in essence, a horror film commissioned by the state, meant to reinforce a brutal doctrine: obedience or obliteration. Yet this tactic may have backfired. The annihilation of Lidice shocked the world. In Britain, the US, and across Latin America, towns and neighborhoods renamed themselves Lidice in solidarity. Poems were written, statues erected. The story of Lidice became a rallying cry, a symbol of Nazi cruelty, yes, but also of human resilience. And yet, many details about that day remain disturbingly opaque. Why was Lidice, a modest village with no obvious military importance, chosen over others? Was it simply random, or was there someone that made it a target? Why were some children spared while others vanished into the machinery of genocide? What intelligence truly guided the decision-makers? And what of the handful of survivors, women and children who returned to a home that no longer existed? Their testimonies offer fragments, but memory can only bear so much. Trauma filters truth through pain, and Lidice offers pain in abundance. Even today, the site resists closure. Archaeologists have uncovered odd discrepancies. Fragments of buildings where no blueprints suggest there should be any. Traces of foundations that don't match Nazi demolition plans. Did parts of the village survive, buried under decades of earth and silence? Or does the very ground still hold secrets too heavy to surface? Lidice was meant to be forgotten. A village wiped clean from the world as a warning. But in erasing it, the Nazis may have preserved it, turning its absence into something eternal. And yet the mystery remains. Was the destruction of Lidice a calculated response to terror? Or was it something darker? A performance of power? A message not just to the Czech people, but to the world? And if so, what exactly was that message? And who was truly meant to hear it? The river Elbe flows quietly through Dresden, its waters reflecting centuries of history along both banks. Once called the Florence on the Elbe, this city was a Baroque jewel, its churches, palaces, and art collections among the finest in Europe. Even now, after all it has endured, Dresden's skyline carries a haunting beauty. But beneath the reconstruction, beneath the elegant domes and restored streets, lies a silence that no blueprint can replace. Because what was lost here wasn't only made of brick and mortar, it was ink and parchment. Names and numbers, orders and secrets, entire shelves of history, gone. In February 1945, as the Second World War staggered toward its close, Allied bombers turned their attention to Dresden. Over 2 days and nights, the city was firebombed in waves. The destruction was cataclysmic. Temperatures soared beyond 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Entire blocks were vaporized. Estimates of the dead range from 25,000 to more than twice that. Still debated, still uncertain. But among the ruins, another loss occurred. One that continues to puzzle historians. The sudden and total disappearance of vast segments of Dresden's historical archives. Much of the city's documentary heritage had been stored in the Sächsisches Staatsarchiv, the Saxon State Archives, as well as in municipal depositories scattered throughout the old town. These contained centuries of records, medieval land deeds, personal diaries, Prussian-era court files, inventories of artwork, financial ledgers, and more. Of particular importance were documents pertaining to the Nazi regime's activities in the region, administrative correspondences, deportation orders, and potentially sensitive internal memos. After the bombing, search teams ventured into the rubble, expecting to recover fragments at least. Charred remains, scorched ledgers, shattered bindings. Instead, in certain sections, they found nothing. Entire vaults were empty. No debris, no paper ash, no signs of fire damage. Rooms where archival boxes should have been housed showed no indication they had ever burned at all. In some places, steel shelving was intact, but bare. It was as if the documents had been removed before the bombs fell. How is it possible? One explanation is simple logistics. As Allied air raids increased, many German cities took precautions, relocating valuable materials to underground bunkers, countryside estates, or even salt mines. Dresden, too, had begun limited evacuation of its art and archives in late 1944. Could the most sensitive material have been moved quietly, perhaps without detailed records, and later lost during the chaos of Germany's collapse? Some historians think so, but the mystery deepens when looking at what wasn't recovered. Files on forced labor, Nazi property seizures, local Gestapo operations, documents that would have shed light on mid-level bureaucratic complicity, were among the most conspicuously absent. Their removal appears selective, targeted, and no formal records exist listing their transfer. There are whispers, of course, stories passed quietly among archivists and local researchers, claims that as the Red Army advanced from the east and the Allies bombed from the west, select groups under SS or SD authority were ordered to sanitize cities of evidence, paper trails that could later be used in war crimes tribunals. Could Dresden's archives have been deliberately purged, or spirited away to hidden locations, buried in alpine bunkers or sealed in tunnels? One oft-cited theory suggests that documents detailing secret German industrial collaborations, especially with neutral countries, were among the most important materials to disappear. Some of these, it's said, included blueprints, patent applications, or financial records that could implicate foreign entities in wartime profiteering. Another rumor speaks of missing art restitution files, lists of looted Jewish property passed through Dresden's museums or routed through the city to Swiss intermediaries. If true, their disappearance would not be just an archival loss, but an act of concealment. But without the documents themselves, how can we know? Then there's the issue of the Soviet archives. After occupying Dresden, the Soviets conducted their own surveys of the wreckage. While official Soviet reports emphasized the destruction of art and culture, many German scholars quietly allege that the Red Army confiscated documents from ruined government buildings and secret police stations before Western investigators could reach them. Did crates of archival material leave Dresden aboard military transports, eventually disappearing into the bowels of the Soviet state? It wouldn't be the first time. Similar stories surround the archives of Königsberg, Breslau, and parts of Berlin, records vanishing behind the Iron Curtain, later to be discovered in Moscow's Special Archive, often mislabeled or restricted for decades. Yet inquiries into Dresden's missing records have yielded little. Russian officials deny possessing relevant materials. Western governments, for their part, show limited interest in pursuing such cold trails. Perhaps to some, the past is more dangerous than the present. Today, Dresden's rebuilt libraries and archives are meticulously curated. Staff work diligently to reconstruct historical records from secondary sources, surviving fragments, and international cooperation. But there are gaps, whole generations of data that simply no longer exist. And those gaps seem almost too precise. Why were particular categories of information lost, while others, like parish registers or court rolls, survived? Was it coincidence, selective removal, or something more calculated? Who had access to the archives in those final days of the war? Were there hidden agendas at play? An effort to erase culpability, protect assets, or even shape post-war narratives? And where, if anywhere, are the missing records now? As Dresden continues to rebuild, not only its structures, but its memory, the void left by its lost archives remains palpable. In the silence of sealed vaults and the blank pages of vanished ledgers, history waits. And one is left to wonder, are Dresden's missing archives buried somewhere beneath foreign soil? Were they destroyed in the war's final hours, or hidden away by those who understood the power of the past? In a city once burned to nothing, what truths might still lie beneath the ashes? In the heart of Berlin, looming with Gothic severity, the Reichstag stands, a structure of stone, steel, and symbolism. Today, its restored dome gleams with modern transparency. But in 1933, it bore only the weight of storm clouds and suspicion. It was February 27th, a cold, brittle night. The city lay quiet under a sky streaked with winter haze when flames erupted inside the Reichstag building. Within minutes, the great assembly chamber, home of the German parliament, was engulfed. Fire danced across oak panels and vaulted ceilings. Smoke poured into the Berlin sky. The blaze was visible from blocks away. Crowds gathered, police cordoned the streets, and journalists hurried to the scene. But even as the fire was extinguished, another fire, political, ideological, and historical, was just beginning to burn. To this day, no single event in Germany's pre-war timeline is more shrouded in doubt, distortion, and calculated silence than the Reichstag fire. The official version came swiftly. Within hours, a suspect was arrested inside the building, Marinus van der Lubbe, a 24-year-old Dutch communist. Shirtless, sweating, and allegedly carrying incendiary tools, he was said to have acted alone. The Nazi press wasted no time branding him a symbol of communist conspiracy. Joseph Goebbels labeled the fire a signal for Bolshevik uprising. But even then, the story didn't quite add up. How had van der Lubbe, a drifter with limited intelligence and near blindness in one eye, managed to infiltrate one of the most guarded buildings in Germany? How had he ignited multiple fires across a vast chamber so quickly, leaving signs of accelerants in more than one location? And why had key Nazi officials, including Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring, arrived at the scene within minutes? The timing was uncanny. Just 4 weeks earlier, Hitler had been appointed chancellor. His political position remained fragile, his power constrained by rivals and the democratic constitution. But after the fire, everything changed. The very next day, President Hindenburg, under Hitler's urging, signed the Reichstag Fire Decree, a sweeping suspension of civil liberties. Freedom of the press, speech, and assembly were abolished. Political arrests surged. Communist deputies were expelled from parliament. And within a month, Hitler had passed the Enabling Act, granting him near dictatorial powers, all because of one fire. If van der Lubbe acted alone, then history turned on the will of a single man. But what if he was merely a pawn? Several theories emerged almost immediately. One argued that the fire was, in fact, a false flag operation, a staged event orchestrated by the Nazis to justify a crackdown on their opponents. Göring, who took personal command at the scene, was long suspected of involvement. In 1945, a captured Nazi general claimed Göring had boasted, "I set fire to the Reichstag," though no corroborating evidence was ever found. Another theory holds that van der Lubbe did start the fire, but not alone, and not without assistance. Could he have been manipulated, his ideological fervor exploited by agents who ensured the flames spread faster than he ever intended? Some investigators pointed to inconsistencies in the fire's pattern. Independent studies suggested multiple ignition points, implying coordinated arson rather than a single act. And yet, the court in Leipzig ruled that van der Lubbe had acted independently. He was tried, sentenced, and executed by guillotine in 1934. The other accused, prominent German communists, were acquitted, much to Hitler's fury. But the truth, it seems, was already buried beneath layers of political necessity. Decades later, the mystery deepened. In the 1960s, East German historians, intent on exposing Nazi crimes, revived the false flag theory with renewed vigor. Their findings, however, were dismissed in the West as politically motivated. Then, in the 1990s, with access to Stasi archives and newly opened German records, researchers took another look. Some concluded that van der Lubbe had indeed been alone. Others, however, uncovered memos hinting at prior Nazi knowledge of a communist demonstration plan, suggesting that the regime may have allowed the fire to occur even if they didn't light the match themselves. In 2008, Germany officially overturned van der Lubbe's death sentence, citing it as a miscarriage of justice under a brutal regime. But they did not exonerate him entirely. The case remains unresolved. So what really happened that night in Berlin? Did van der Lubbe act out of desperation, a solitary arsonist with a taste for political drama? Did Nazi operatives fan the flames, literally and figuratively crafting a spectacle to justify tyranny? Or was it a murky confluence of both, a lone actor whose timing proved too convenient for a regime hungry for power? And if evidence of coordination did exist, was it lost in the Allied bombings, buried in Soviet archives, or destroyed by the Nazis themselves? The Reichstag still bears the scars of that night. Though rebuilt and repurposed, the building's stone facade has preserved a section of charred wall, left exposed, a reminder of how fragile democracy can be. In the end, the fire is more than a historical incident. It is a symbol, a warning, of how a single night can change the course of nations, of how truth can be obscured by politics, fear, and the ashes of catastrophe. And as we walk the halls of the Reichstag today, past glass walkways and etched memorials, we must ask, was it an act of madness, a masterstroke of manipulation, or something still more elusive, lost to time, hidden in the embers of history? Perhaps the real fire still burns, not in the chamber, but in the unanswered questions that linger more than 90 years later. From the burning chambers of Berlin's Reichstag, we turn now to a place where smoke rose not from arson, but from butter lamps flickering in ancient temples. The wind howls differently here. High in the Himalayas, the roof of the world stretches into silence. Jagged peaks pierce the sky like watchful sentinels, their summits cloaked in snow and centuries. The air is thin, both literally and metaphorically, as secrets seem to echo off the stones. Prayer flags flutter from crumbling stupas, their mantras slowly unraveling into the wind. This is Tibet, remote, sacred, and for much of the 20th century, deeply mysterious. But as World War II carved new borders and redefined power, even these isolated valleys would find themselves drawn into the gravity of global intelligence games. What was the United States doing here? And why did some of its most secretive agencies direct their attention to a land with no modern army, no strategic cities, and no clear allegiance? It begins, as many stories of espionage do, with maps. In 1942, as the war escalated across Asia, U.S. interest in the Tibetan plateau quietly intensified. Japan's occupation of large swaths of China and their proximity to India threatened Allied supply routes. American strategists saw the vast, largely uncharted territory of Tibet as a potential corridor or buffer zone. But the land was a mystery to them. So, the Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA, began to ask questions. In that same year, two unlikely American emissaries set out from New Delhi. Ilya Tolstoy, grandson of the famed Russian novelist, and Brooke Dolan II, a Philadelphia naturalist and adventurer. Their mission was shrouded in vague language, diplomatic outreach, cartographic survey, cultural exchange. But the truth behind their trek to Lhasa likely ran deeper. Why else would American intelligence send envoys through treacherous mountain passes into a fiercely independent theocracy with no clear ties to the war? Their arrival in Lhasa, marked by formal audiences with the young 14th Dalai Lama and his regents, was the first American diplomatic contact with Tibet in history. They were treated with a curious blend of suspicion and reverence. Gifts were exchanged, photographs taken, yet no formal alliance was reached. Still, what they returned with was invaluable. Intelligence about terrain, climate, and the geopolitical sentiments of Tibet's spiritual and political elite. The OSS, and later the CIA, would file their findings with quiet urgency. But that was just the beginning. As the war ended and the Cold War emerged, Tibet's strategic relevance did not fade. It grew. In 1949, Mao Zedong's communist forces took Beijing. By 1950, the People's Liberation Army marched into Tibet. The ancient kingdom's sovereignty was swiftly dismantled, and behind the scenes, America watched. With the rise of communist China, Tibet's fate became entangled in broader U.S. containment strategies. In 1956, the CIA initiated one of its most enigmatic operations, training Tibetan resistance fighters in secret camps in Colorado. Yes, Colorado. At a facility near Camp Hale, ethnic Tibetans, including monks and peasants, were taught parachuting, guerrilla warfare, sabotage. Why would America, ostensibly distant from the Tibetan cause, invest in such a covert program? Some say it was purely strategic. Tibet offered an ideal base for observing Chinese missile tests and troop movements. Others argue the CIA believed supporting Tibetan resistance would foment internal destabilization within China. But what remains curious is the layered silence surrounding the missions. The operations, known internally as St. Circus and later St. Barnum, were kept classified for decades. American pilots dropped arms and radios to Tibetan fighters. CIA handlers maintained limited contact with resistance cells operating in some of the world's most unforgiving terrain. Reports of success were often exaggerated, and internal documents show growing doubts about the viability of the campaign. Yet the operations continued into the early 1970s. All the while, the public remained unaware. What else might have taken place? Some researchers believe that U.S. intelligence wasn't just after political advantage, but esoteric knowledge. The Nazis, too, had launched expeditions into Tibet in the late 1930s, hoping to find spiritual or racial origins tied to their ideology. Could it be that remnants of those ideas persisted within post-war intelligence circles? Certain fringe theories suggest that CIA operatives sought Tibetan texts believed to contain ancient psychological or metaphysical teachings, tools that could be applied to propaganda or psychological warfare. While these claims are speculative, they are not entirely without precedent. The CIA's later MK-Ultra program would indeed experiment with hypnosis, mind control, and altered states of consciousness. Could the seeds of such thinking have been sown on Himalayan soil? The Tibetan people, for their part, paid the highest price. Thousands perished in failed uprisings. The Dalai Lama fled in 1959, escaping to India with CIA assistance. The resistance, once quietly supported by Washington, was abandoned in the 1970s as relations between the U.S. and China normalized. Documents were sealed. Funds vanished. Names were forgotten. Only much later, through declassified reports and the testimonies of aging operatives, did fragments of the story resurface. But key elements remain unknown. How much did the U.S. know about Chinese plans before the invasion? Were there intelligence deals struck with local Tibetan leaders that have never been disclosed? And most hauntingly, did the United States exploit Tibet's spiritual struggle for its own geopolitical ends? Or was it merely another pawn in a game much larger than any one mountain kingdom? Today, the wind still carries prayers across the peaks. Monasteries, some rebuilt, some in ruins, dot the landscape like quiet witnesses to a forgotten chapter. And the files? Many remain redacted, misfiled, or simply missing. We're left to ask, was the American mission in Tibet born of strategy, sympathy, or something else entirely? And in the highest shadows of the world, what truths still sleep beneath the snow? As Allied codebreakers deciphered messages in dimly lit bunkers and resistance fighters moved like shadows through occupied cities, another kind of weapon was circulating in Nazi Germany, one without a barrel, without a blast, but with the potential to shift human limits. Its name was Pervitin, and for a time it was as common as a cup of coffee. In a small, sterile lab tucked within Berlin's Temmler Pharmaceutical Company, white-coated chemists moved deliberately. Glass beakers clinked, powders were weighed, and a clear, crystalline compound took shape. It had no scent, no dramatic appearance, just a fine white dust that, when ingested, could unlock hours of wakefulness, sharpened focus, and unshakable confidence. The substance? Methamphetamine hydrochloride. Germany, already intoxicated with the rhetoric of dominance and speed, now had a drug that seemed to mirror its ambitions. But how did a synthetic stimulant, first synthesized in the late 19th century, become a standard issue item in Hitler's Wehrmacht? And what price was paid, seen and unseen, for relying on such a chemical crutch? The story begins in the late 1930s, when German doctors began prescribing Pervitin to civilians as a mood enhancer. Marketed to housewives and factory workers, it promised clarity, efficiency, and energy. Newspaper ads described it as a pick-me-up for those weary of daily toil, an early forerunner of what we might today associate with energy drinks or nootropics. But by 1940, the drug found a much darker purpose. During the Blitzkrieg into Poland and France, soldiers were required to perform at extraordinary levels. Days without sleep, forced marches across vast distances, sudden engagements with little warning. Military physicians and strategists began distributing Pervitin tablets by the tens of millions. It was referred to by some troops as Stuka-Tabletten, Stoka pills, after the terrifying dive bombers that symbolized Germany's swift assaults. Was it simply a matter of keeping men awake, or was it something more? In examining historical archives, we find accounts that are both clinical and troubling. German tank crews, often operating under extreme pressure, were issued methamphetamine to maintain alertness during long hours in cramped, volatile conditions. Pilots flew bombing missions deep into enemy territory, many dosed to suppress fear and fatigue. Infantry units crossed enemy lines in the dead of night, with little rest for days. Many were high. Letters home, intercepted and later declassified, tell part of the tale. Some soldiers praised the pills for making them feel invincible. Others reported terrifying side effects, hallucinations, blackouts, sudden crashes of energy that left them debilitated. Was Nazi Germany unknowingly waging a chemical war not only against its enemies, but within its own ranks? What's particularly chilling is how systemic it became. Pervitin wasn't just tolerated. It was formally integrated into supply chains, medical kits, and rations. Military doctors issued dosage instructions. Commanders monitored distribution. At one point, it's estimated that the German army distributed over 35 million tablets in just a few months during the French campaign of 1940. But what were the long-term effects? And who made the decisions? While methamphetamine undeniably enhanced short-term performance, the collapse often followed quickly. Some soldiers suffered psychotic breaks. Others became chemically dependent. The addiction spread silently, often masked by the chaos of war. Combat stress, shell shock, and drug-induced paranoia blurred into one another. And here, the trail becomes murkier. By 1941, concerns were growing within the German High Command. Some medical officials warned of the drug's addictive properties. Field reports began to include unexplained acts of violence, disobedience, and even suicide. Was methamphetamine altering not only physical endurance, but the psychological stability of the troops? Or, as some have asked, was it being used deliberately for those very effects? This question brings us to one of the more controversial theories, never fully confirmed, but difficult to ignore. Certain fringe historians argue that elements of the Nazi regime, fascinated with altering the mind and body, saw Pervitin not just as a stimulant, but as part of a broader experiment in human optimization. Nazi ideology was steeped in the pursuit of a new man, a being capable of superhuman feats, impervious to weakness or empathy. Could the mass distribution of methamphetamine have been a test bed for this ideal? Support for this theory is drawn from scattered Nazi medical reports and, more ominously, from the SS's growing interest in pharmacology. There are mentions of trials involving higher doses. Others hint at mixtures with opioids to temper the crash, and though mainstream historians caution against overinterpretation, the unanswered questions linger. Was Pervitin just a tool of necessity in a desperate war? Or was it part of something more deeply sinister? One man's experience may offer further clues. Adolf Hitler himself was under the constant care of Dr. Theodor Morell, his personal physician. Morell's records, recovered after the war, detail an astonishing pharmaceutical regimen. Hormones, sedatives, painkillers, and stimulants. Among them, methamphetamine. How frequently Hitler received injections containing methamphetamine remains debated, but the implication is there. The manic speeches, the wild mood swings in his final years, some have suggested that his chemical dependencies could have played a role in his erratic behavior and declining judgment. If true, it invites a haunting reflection. To what extent was the fate of Nazi Germany shaped not just by ideology or strategy, but by intoxication? Today, the topic remains a subject of academic inquiry, largely buried beneath broader military narratives. But here and there, the pieces resurface. In a soldier's journal, in a declassified logistics report, in the powdered residue of a forgotten field kit. Was the widespread use of methamphetamine a desperate attempt to defy the limits of the human body, or an early glimpse into a future where warfare would be waged not just with weapons, but with chemistry? And as the files remain only partially opened, one final question lingers in the shadows. How much of World War II was truly fought by men, and how much by minds chemically reprogrammed to ignore fear, pain, and conscience? In the heart of Western Russia, where the birch trees grow tall and the pines thicken into silent sentinels, lies a forest that once whispered secrets buried beneath its roots. Katyn, just west of Smolensk, is a name that, for decades, was spoken only in shadows, behind closed doors, or not at all. Its landscape is deceptively serene, a quilt of moss and soil underfoot, with shafts of sunlight filtering through the dense green canopy above. But below the forest floor, history festered, undisturbed for years. In this stillness, something terrible had occurred. Something so deliberately hidden, it would take over half a century for the full truth to be acknowledged, if indeed it ever was. In the spring of 1940, as the Second World War tore across Europe, tens of thousands of Polish officers, intellectuals, doctors, priests, and other members of the nation's elite vanished into Soviet custody. They were prisoners of war, captured after the Red Army's invasion of eastern Poland in September 1939. Their families waited, wrote letters, prayed, but they never returned. Officially, their fate remained unknown. Unofficially, it was the stuff of rumors and nightmares. It wasn't until April 1943, 3 years after the disappearances, that the German army, then occupying the area around Smolensk, stumbled upon something ghastly. Deep in the Katyn forest, a mass grave was discovered. The Germans, eager to exploit the find for propaganda, invited an international delegation to inspect the site. What they uncovered was horrifying. Thousands of neatly bound corpses, each shot execution-style in the back of the head, hands tied behind their backs. The victims wore Polish uniforms. Their documents and personal effects dated back to 1940. The implication was unmistakable. Germany immediately blamed the Soviet Union. The Soviets, in turn, accused the Nazis of orchestrating the massacre themselves in 1941, after they had invaded Soviet territory. So began one of the most complex and enduring cover-ups of the 20th century. But what really happened in Katyn? And why did it take decades before any government admitted the truth? Documents discovered after the fall of the Soviet Union point squarely at the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. Orders signed by Lavrenti Beria, head of the NKVD and one of Stalin's closest confidants, directed the execution of over 20,000 Polish nationals held in Soviet prison camps, many in places like Kozelsk, Starobelsk, and Ostashkov. The reasoning? These individuals were viewed as the backbone of Polish national identity, officers and professionals who, if released, might resist Soviet control or reignite Polish independence. To the Soviet leadership, their elimination was not a crime. It was a strategy. Still, the Soviet Union maintained its denial. During the Nuremberg trials, Soviet prosecutors attempted to pin the blame on the Germans. When Polish exiles raised the issue in international forums, they were silenced, ridiculed, or accused of spreading fascist lies. Why such a stubborn refusal to acknowledge the crime? Perhaps because admitting it would have shattered the carefully curated post-war image of the Soviet Union as a liberator. Or perhaps because, in the logic of Cold War geopolitics, truth was a luxury no superpower could afford. The Katyn cover-up became a diplomatic minefield. In the West, intelligence agencies knew more than they admitted. British and American officials had access to reports, some from their own wartime diplomats, suggesting Soviet guilt. Yet, during the war, when the USSR was a vital ally against Nazi Germany, these details were quietly buried. In 1952, the U.S. House of Representatives formed the Madden Committee, which concluded that the NKVD had committed the massacre. Still, Washington stopped short of taking official action, wary of disrupting already fragile relations with Moscow. So the silence continued. Decades passed. The forest grew around the graves as though trying to reclaim the horror within. But the mystery doesn't end with official admissions. There are still unanswered questions, some chilling in their implications. For instance, were the Katyn executions part of a broader Soviet program of ethnic engineering? While the massacre targeted elite Poles, it also fit a larger pattern of Soviet repression, mass deportations, forced resettlements, and the quiet erasure of national identities. Or consider this: did any Polish officers escape? Or were some transferred elsewhere for use in intelligence operations, only to disappear under different circumstances? And then there's the theory, whispered in fringe corners of Polish history, that some Western powers knew the full scale of the massacre as early as 1940, but suppressed the truth for strategic gain. Could Katyn have been sacrificed on the altar of wartime necessity? In 1990, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev formally admitted that the NKVD was responsible for the killings. In 2010, the Russian State Duma passed a resolution acknowledging Stalin's direct role. And yet, even today, controversies remain. Access to archival materials is limited. Some key documents have vanished. Others, redacted beyond usefulness. Russian officials have at times backtracked, casting doubt on past admissions or suggesting moral equivalence with German atrocities. So, despite the exhumations, the investigations, and the apologies, the Katyn massacre remains a wound, only partially healed, only partially understood. What else lies beneath the earth of that quiet Russian forest? What truths were buried not just in soil, but in silence? And in the great ledger of World War II's secrets, where propaganda, politics, and power often eclipsed justice, how many more forests like Katyn still guard their dead, waiting for history to catch up? Beneath the vaulted ceilings of a long-forgotten salt mine in the Austrian Alps, silence lingers. Dim shafts of light pierce through ancient ventilation holes, illuminating dust that drifts like snow in the still air. The walls, cold and crystalline, once held more than minerals. They held treasures, masterpieces. Renoir, Rembrandts, Michelangelos. Priceless works of art stored not in museums or grand halls, but buried deep underground in an effort to outlast the war. But many never emerged. Even today, decades after the fall of the Third Reich, the fate of thousands of looted artworks remains unresolved. Their frames may have crumbled, their pigments may have faded, but their stories endure, haunting catalogs, archives, and the memories of those who seek them. How does an empire, even a criminal one, come to steal so much beauty? Between 1933 and 1945, the Nazi regime orchestrated one of the largest art thefts in human history. Entire collections were confiscated, museums emptied, private homes ransacked. The victims were often Jewish families, wealthy, cultured, and suddenly stripped of everything, from heirlooms to heritage. Other seizures were ideologically driven. Modern art deemed degenerate was purged, replaced with pieces that aligned with Nazi ideals of racial purity and classical grandeur. Art was not merely plunder, it was a weapon, a symbol, a trophy. And Adolf Hitler, a failed painter himself, saw cultural dominance as integral to his vision of a 1,000-year Reich. In his mind, the greatest museum the world had ever seen, the Führer Museum, would rise in his hometown of Linz, Austria. And to fill its walls, art would be taken from across occupied Europe. Not all thefts were brutal. Some were chillingly bureaucratic. With the stroke of a pen, entire collections were transferred to Nazi institutions. The Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, or ERR, was tasked with cataloging and seizing valuables from enemy territories. They operated with precision, photographing, numbering, and shipping thousands of artworks to secret storage sites across the continent. The most infamous caches included the salt mines of Altaussee, the Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria, and abandoned rail tunnels in France and Poland. Each hiding place carefully chosen for protection, both from Allied bombings and from prying eyes. Yet as Allied forces advanced and the Reich began to crumble, chaos took hold. Some treasures were hastily relocated, others were destroyed by retreating Nazis, and many, perhaps thousands, simply disappeared. Consider the case of Raphael's portrait of a young man, taken from the Czartoryski Museum in Krakow, Poland. Widely considered one of the artist's greatest lost works, it vanished sometime after 1945. Despite countless leads, it has never resurfaced. Was it destroyed in the final months of the war? Hidden in a private vault? Or quietly sold on the black market under an assumed provenance? The mystery deepens when one considers the possibility of entire trains, allegedly filled with looted gold and artwork, going missing as the Third Reich collapsed. The so-called Nazi gold train legend, centered in Lower Silesia, has fueled decades of speculation. Explorers, historians, and treasure hunters have scoured the forests near Wałbrzych in southwestern Poland, following rumors of sealed tunnels and buried vaults. To date, no confirmed discovery has been made. After the war, a handful of Allied soldiers, known as the Monuments Men, worked tirelessly to recover and repatriate stolen art. Their efforts were heroic, saving untold cultural treasures from oblivion. And yet, for every painting found, another remains unaccounted for. Where are they now? Some may hang quietly in private collections, sold illegally but without scrutiny. Others may lie forgotten in the basements of European estates, their owners unaware of, or unwilling to disclose, their dark provenance. Then there's the troubling suggestion that some pieces might reside in museums today, misattributed, mislabeled, or simply ignored. Institutions have, in some cases, been slow to investigate the origins of their holdings, wary of the financial and ethical implications of restitution. And what of the less tangible loss, the erasure of a family's cultural soul? Entire lineages of collectors, patrons, and curators were wiped out. Their memories endure only in faded photographs and fragmented lists. For these victims, art was not a commodity. It was memory, identity, legacy. To this day, international databases such as the Lost Art Database in Germany or the Art Loss Register in London catalog tens of thousands of missing works. Each entry represents a question mark in history, an unsolved mystery tied to real lives. And while high-profile recoveries, such as the 2012 discovery of over 1,400 looted works in the Munich apartment of Cornelius Gurlitt, make headlines, most cases fade into obscurity. How many of these works remain hidden in plain sight? Could a painting above a fireplace in a modest Austrian home be a missing Van Gogh? Might a dusty box in a government archive conceal a rare Dürer? Could a recently sold piece at a provincial auction be a lost Cézanne? And would anyone know if it was? The Nazi art looting campaign was not just theft, it was erasure. The mystery of the missing art is not simply about location. It's about silence, about the secrets of provenance, the reluctance of institutions, the fragility of memory. For each canvas, sculpture, or artifact still unaccounted for, there is a story left incomplete. So we must ask, how much of humanity's cultural legacy remains hidden, locked behind walls, buried beneath the ground, or simply forgotten? And if the art is ever found, will we recognize its value, not just in gold leaf or brushstroke, but in the history it carries? The wind moves softly through the hedgerows of Normandy, rustling through fields where battle once echoed like thunder. Today, the landscape appears calm, an ocean of green stretching across the French countryside, interrupted only by the quiet rise of ancient stone walls and the occasional crumbling farmhouse. But in the hush of early morning, under a low, mist-hung sky, local farmers still speak in hushed tones of something that doesn't quite belong. A shape, a sound, a presence, a tank that no one can find. Normandy is rich in the memory of war. The beaches of Gold, Juno, Sword, Omaha, and Utah are etched into the collective consciousness. The stories of D-Day and the months that followed have been told and retold. But some tales, those whispered at the edge of maps and official records, don't fit neatly into history books. One such story centers around a remote village near St. Lo. According to multiple locals, farmers, shepherds, and even a priest, an armored vehicle has been seen on several occasions roaming the nearby woods and rural paths long after the fighting ended. But not just any vehicle. They describe it as a tank, sometimes American, sometimes German, silently navigating terrain where no tracks are left behind. It appears in the early hours, often just before sunrise. Witnesses report the sound of treads on stone, followed by the low whine of an engine, even though no such machine has ever been recovered or officially reported in the area. The sightings date back to the 1950s and stretch into the early 2000s, always the same, the tank that isn't there. Skeptics point to natural explanations, auditory illusions in fog, agricultural equipment misidentified in poor light. Some blame echoes of machinery from nearby roads or the presence of buried metal objects distorting sound. All plausible, all sensible. And yet, the reports continue. Could this be some unknown artifact of psychological imprint? The collective memory of war manifesting in ways we don't yet understand? Or is it a deeper mystery, one rooted in the chaos of war itself? We know that Normandy in the summer of 1944 was a theater of unparalleled logistical complexity. Hundreds of thousands of Allied troops landed within a short span of weeks. Equipment flowed across the beaches at a staggering pace, and in the rush of movement, Some units, both Allied and Axis, vanished into the fog of war, never fully accounted for. Could a single vehicle have gone rogue? Could it have been camouflaged, lost in retreat, hidden in a barn or hedgerow and later stumbled upon by locals who preferred not to speak of it? Records recovered from the 12th SS Panzer Division, active in the Normandy region, indicate at least 3 armored vehicles missing in action, presumed destroyed, but never conclusively confirmed. Likewise, some American units reported losing tanks in the labyrinth of narrow French lanes during Operation Cobra, their final positions unclear in the chaos of shifting lines. But those explanations suggest the tank was once real. What remains unexplained is its persistence. In 1978, a local school teacher conducting a student history walk through the region claimed to have heard the distinctive metallic rattle of treads moving along the lane near Montbray. His students heard it too. Yet when they turned the corner, nothing was there. No sound, no tracks, just the soft churn of wind in the tall summer grass. That same summer, a farmer reported seeing what he described as a dull shape, like a shadow carved from iron, slowly crawling across his lower pasture before vanishing behind a copse of trees. When he investigated, the field was untouched, no damage, no depressions in the earth, and no vehicle. Was it hallucination, a trick of light, or something else? Military historians have drawn connections between the Normandy Phantom tank and broader reports of residual hauntings on battlefields. Similar stories have emerged from the Somme, from Verdun, and from the Ardennes, where distant artillery has been heard decades after the guns fell silent. Could the Normandy tank be one of these echoes? A kind of psychic imprint, endlessly replaying the trauma of war in the places it burned deepest? Parapsychologists suggest that intense human suffering and conflict can leave behind more than just physical ruins. The idea, though controversial, posits that some environments might record extreme emotional events. The result, ghost-like apparitions tied not to spirits, but to the memory of place itself. Still others propose a more fringe theory. During the war, both Allied and Axis powers experimented with psychological deception and battlefield illusion. The U.S. deployed the Ghost Army, a top-secret unit that used inflatable tanks, sound effects, and fake radio transmissions to confuse the enemy. Could there have been experiments, on either side, that involved projecting the image or sound of tanks to mislead advancing forces? Is it possible that remnants of such operations, either technology or lingering phenomena, continue to fool the senses long after their creators are gone? So the reports continue, quietly passed along in cafes, farmhouses, and churchyards. A mechanic swears he once found fresh treads in soft earth just outside a pasture, though he was the only one to see them. A tourist taking early morning photographs near an old trail captured a blurred image of something armored in the mist, but dismissed it as a lens flare. And each time, those who investigate find nothing. No evidence. No proof. Only the echo of what may have passed. Is the phantom tank of Normandy a myth born from war's long shadow? A shared hallucination among people who carry the stories of grandfathers and great-uncles into a new century? Or is it something we've yet to understand? Some fusion of memory, place, and mystery that defies our attempts at explanation? Whatever the answer, the question remains. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the mist hangs low and the past feels close, who, or what, still moves through Normandy's forgotten lanes? And if you ever find yourself standing alone in those fields, and you hear the grind of unseen treads behind you, would you turn and look? Or would you let the mystery pass, undisturbed, into the morning fog?